I drove out to the forest on a late summer morning with the feeling that I needed a break from everything. My head felt heavy from the constant noise of life, and the only thing I wanted was a quiet night by myself outside, far away from any houses or roads. I picked a forest area I had been to a few times before, a place where tall pine trees grew so close to each other that they blocked most of the light, and long dirt tracks twisted through the hills with almost no sign of people. I wanted that silence. I wanted long hours where nothing but wind and insects moved around me. I felt like my mind needed that kind of empty space. The drive was calm at first, but as I got deeper into the forest, I noticed something odd. About 4 miles in, a small silver car was parked on the side of the dirt road, a little crooked, as if someone had stopped in a hurry. The windows were fogged from the inside even though the day was hot. I slowed down and looked at it through my own window. The car looked like it had been there for hours, maybe longer. Dirt had built up around the tires. There were old footprints around it, hard to see but clear enough under the dry leaves. The forest around the car felt strangely still, like the air itself became heavy when I passed it. Something about it pressed into my chest in a way I couldn't explain. It felt wrong, but I told myself that people left cars out here all the time. Hikers did weird things. Maybe someone left it overnight or got a ride back. It wasn't my problem. Still, I remember the way my stomach tightened. It felt like my body knew something before my mind wanted to accept it. I kept driving until the road ended at a wider clearing where I usually camped. The clearing had short dry grass, rocks scattered around, and enough open sky to see the stars at night. I parked my truck at the edge, turned off the engine, and listened to the silence sink in. It always took a few minutes for my ears to adjust, but once the quiet settled, it almost felt like a blanket. I pulled out my gear, set up the tent, laid out my sleeping bag, and placed my bag near the entrance. Everything felt normal at first. Then I noticed the forest felt a little too quiet. No birds, no rustling, just the steady, dull pressure of still air. It made the hair on my arms rise even though nothing dangerous was around. I tried to ignore it. I wasn't used to this level of silence, but maybe it was just the weather or the time of day. The ground smelled dry, almost dusty, and the sunlight filtered through the trees in straight golden lines that made everything look calm on the surface, even though something underneath felt tense. After setting up camp, I walked around the clearing to stretch my legs. The dirt felt soft under my boots, and the old pine needles made a faint cracking sound every time I stepped. The forest had always felt familiar to me, but that day something in it felt like it was watching me, not with eyes but with a strange heaviness I could not shake. I kept walking deeper into the trees until I reached a small slope that led down to a narrow trail. I had been on that trail before. It looped around a small hill, then curved through thick brush, and eventually connected to another trail that led back to the main dirt road. I followed it for a while, moving slowly and trying to get comfortable with the setting again. But then I saw it, fresh footprints on the trail. Not mine, not old, very clear. They pointed one direction, heading deeper into the woods. The footprints were from one person, based on the spacing, and they looked unsure, like the person had been wandering without a clear idea of where they were going. I felt a small shiver in my chest because the prints looked recent, maybe from that same morning. I tried to tell myself that hikers always came through here, but combined with that abandoned car, it felt like a line was forming between things. I followed the prints for about 10 minutes before deciding to stop. I didn't want to spend the rest of the day chasing someone I didn't know. I turned back, but the whole walk back to camp felt slower, heavier, like the air thickened as I went deeper into it. When I reached the clearing again, the sun had started lowering. Shadows stretched long across the grass. I gathered wood, made a small fire, cooked a simple meal, and sat down in front of it. The crackling sound felt good, almost comforting. But that strange, empty quiet in the trees around me didn't go away. I kept looking up without meaning to, scanning the tree line again and again. The dark began to spread through the branches like thick ink, and every now and then a small breeze moved the leaves in a way that made me tense up. I told myself I was just being paranoid because I had noticed the car and the footprints. If I hadn't seen those things, the forest would feel the same as it always did. As night settled fully, the air cooled down fast. The firelight made the shadows bounce and twist around the clearing. The sky was dark and clear, packed with stars. I sat for hours, letting the quiet press over me. Sometimes it felt peaceful, sometimes it felt suffocating. I couldn't figure out why my chest stayed tight. Nothing around me looked out of place, but the silence still felt wrong. It must have been close to midnight when I finally crawled into my tent. The ground felt cold under my sleeping bag, and the air had that faint smell of pine and dry dirt. I lay on my back, listening for small sounds. The forest was never silent like this. It should have had insects buzzing, small animals running past, leaves shaking with the wind. Instead, it felt like the whole place held its breath. I slowly drifted into light sleep, the kind where you can still feel the world around you. I didn't know what time it was when I opened my eyes again, but I woke with a cold weight in my chest, as if something outside had changed. The air inside the tent felt too thin. My breathing felt shallow. I stayed completely still, listening. First, there was nothing. Then, somewhere deeper in the trees, I heard a faint snapping sound, like a twig breaking under someone's foot. I stayed frozen. I listened harder. The snapping repeated, slow and irregular, like someone was taking careful steps. I knew the difference between animals and humans. This was not the pattern of an animal moving around. This had the heavy, deliberate pressure of a person stepping carefully, trying not to make noise. My throat felt tight. I didn't move a muscle. I kept waiting for the sound to fade away. But it didn't. It moved at the edge of hearing, sometimes closer, sometimes farther, but always in a slow, careful rhythm. Minutes passed, maybe an hour. Couldn't tell. Time stretched thin. My ears felt strained from how hard I focused. Then the steps stopped completely. Not faded, just stopped. I waited for what felt like forever, staring at the ceiling of the tent. I kept feeling like something was just outside in the dark, standing still, listening to me. My own heartbeat felt loud in my ears. Eventually the sky began to lighten, and the pale blue of early morning leaked through the fabric of the tent. I didn't sleep after that. When I finally got out of the tent, the clearing looked normal again, but the air felt colder than it should for a summer morning. I walked the edge of the clearing and found fresh footprints in the dirt, near the tree line, on the opposite side of where the older trail prints had been. These were very clear. They were not mine. They were not from an animal. Someone had stood there. Someone had watched my camp. My stomach felt heavy, almost numb. I followed the prints only a few steps into the trees before stopping. The tracks went back into the forest, toward the deeper trails, the same direction the earlier footprints had gone. I had two choices: pack up and leave early or stay another night and pretend everything was fine. I told myself that maybe the person from the car was just lost and walking around. Maybe they walked near my camp without seeing it. Maybe they were confused. But the footprints told a different story. They had been facing the camp directly. They had not wandered. They had stood and faced my tent. I tried to shake it off, but the fear settled in my spine like a cold ache. I decided to stay but be more careful. I kept moving around during the day so I wouldn't sit still and overthink everything. I hiked to a nearby ridge, keeping track of the path with small marks on trees so I wouldn't get lost. The ridge gave a wide view of the forest, and I tried to relax as I looked over the waves of green trees stretching miles in every direction. But even up there, the silence was strange. A place that big should have been full of life. Instead, it felt empty, like the forest was holding something inside it. On my way back to camp, I noticed something I had missed before. Near the base of a big pine tree, hidden partly under dry needles, I found a torn piece of fabric. Dark blue, thick, maybe from a jacket. It had a rough, ripped edge, and when I pulled it free from the ground, I saw dried dirt on it, like it had been dragged. I held it for a long second before dropping it. My mind kept returning to that silver car on the side of the road. Something was connecting these pieces. When I returned to the clearing, the sun was lowering again. Long shadows formed between the trees. The quiet deepened in a way that made my chest feel tight again. I made a fire, ate a small meal, and tried to calm down. But as the sky turned dark, I felt the same pressure in the air that I felt the night before. Awaiting. I stayed outside the tent longer, watching the tree line, listening for anything. But the forest stayed still, completely still. When I finally went inside the tent and zipped it shut, the cold feeling returned almost immediately. I lay down on my back again, but this time my hands wouldn't stop shaking. My breathing felt shallow again. I listened, waiting for the steps. For a long time, there was nothing. Then, at some point deep in the night, I heard it again. Footsteps. Slow, careful, deliberate. They came from the same direction as the new footprints I saw in the morning. My whole body tightened. I didn't move. The steps came closer, stopping and starting like someone was adjusting their pace to stay quiet. The air in the tent felt thin again, like something outside was pulling all the breath away. I felt an old, primal fear run through my chest. I didn't want to breathe too loud. I didn't even want to blink too hard, afraid the sound might carry. The steps moved closer until they stopped at the very edge of the clearing. I could almost picture someone standing just beyond the fire pit, just outside the moonlight, hidden by the darkness. I didn't hear breathing. I didn't hear movement, just the heavy quiet of someone standing still. The moment stretched for what felt like an hour. Then I heard the soft crack of a pine cone crushed under a foot, just a few yards from my tent. My entire body went cold. The person stayed there, standing, not walking, not searching, just standing. At some point, the sky began to lighten again. The person must have left before dawn, because when I finally forced myself to unzip the tent in the early morning, the clearing was empty. But the same footprints were there, even deeper this time, like the person had been standing in one place long enough to press into the soil. That was when I knew I needed to leave. I took down the tent fast. My hands kept fumbling, but I forced myself to keep going. I packed everything, kept scanning the trees every few seconds. The forest felt wrong. The air felt thick and stale. The silence felt unnatural. I loaded everything into the truck and drove out of the clearing without looking back. My heartbeat didn't slow down until I reached the main dirt road again. But when I passed the spot where the silver car had been, I slammed on the brakes. The car was gone. Only a long patch of disturbed dirt showed where it had been parked. Fresh tire marks. They led deeper into the forest, down a small beaten path that barely looked like a road. A path that led in the same direction the footprints had come from. A deep, heavy understanding settled in my chest. Someone had been out there, not lost, not confused. Someone with a reason. Someone who had abandoned that car, walked the trails, lingered near my camp, and then returned to take the car deeper into the woods. I didn't follow the tire marks. I forced myself to keep driving toward the exit. When I finally reached the main paved road, I pulled over and sat there for a long time, gripping the wheel with shaking hands. Everything felt like it had been building toward something I didn't want to understand. The missing hiker reports I had heard weeks earlier. The abandoned car. The footprints. The watching presence in the dark. The torn fabric. Someone was out there, living in those woods, moving in silence, watching people who came too close. I knew I had been seconds away from something far worse happening. Something real, something dangerous, something not supernatural but painfully human. Someone had been waiting in the dark, standing only yards from my tent, planning something I didn't want to think about. I drove home without stopping. I didn't go camping for months after that. And when I finally did, I never camped alone again. Because the truth is simple. I decided to go camping near a remote lake that sat deep inside a forest I had never explored before. It was something I wanted to do for a long time, because I liked the idea of being alone in a place where there were no roads, no people, no noise, and no distractions. I wanted to feel what it was like to be completely cut off from everything, even if it was just for a few days. I told myself it would be peaceful. I told myself it would be the kind of trip that would clear my head. I told myself that being alone in nature would feel good. The lake was on a map that showed almost nothing else around it. There were no marked campsites, no cabins, no trails that people usually used, and no signs that anyone went there often. That was one of the reasons I picked it. When I read about it online, a few people mentioned it once or twice, but they never said much about it. The pictures I found were old and low quality, showing a quiet place with trees all around it, water so still that it looked like glass, and a shoreline that seemed untouched. It looked perfect, and I thought I would enjoy a place that felt that clean and empty. I parked my car at the nearest dirt road, which was already far from anything, and I took my backpack, my tent, my sleeping bag, and some food. The rest of the distance had to be hiked. I walked for hours through tall trees that blocked the sky, and I followed a small stream that I hoped would lead to the lake. The forest was dense, and the ground was uneven with roots sticking out everywhere. There was no path, so everything felt slow and quiet. I could only hear my footsteps, the sound of my breathing, and the occasional noise of an animal moving somewhere I couldn't see. It took a long time to reach the lake. When I finally saw the water through the trees, it felt like stepping into a completely different world. The lake was bigger than I expected. The water was dark and still, with no ripples except the ones made by a soft breeze. The air smelled clean, almost cold, even though it wasn't cold outside. The silence around the lake felt heavier than the silence in the forest. It was a kind of silence that made every small movement seem louder than it should be. I found a spot close to the water, where the ground was flat enough for my tent. The dirt there was darker than the dirt in the forest, like it had been wet before. There were old pieces of wood lying around, maybe from fallen branches or old dead trees. The grass was thin and patchy. Nothing looked disturbed, so I guess no one had been there for a long time. I liked that feeling. I liked knowing I was probably the only person around for miles. I set up my tent, placed my backpack inside, and sat for a moment to take in the quiet lake. The water reflected the trees like a mirror. There were small insects flying above the surface. The sun was still high when I arrived, but it felt like the area around the lake didn't get as much light as the rest of the forest. The trees leaned close to the water, making long shadows that stretched across the lake like dark fingers. After I set everything up, I walked around the edge of the lake to explore. The shoreline was soft and muddy in some places. My shoes sank slightly into the mud. There were tracks from animals around the lake. Deer tracks, raccoon tracks, and maybe some from smaller animals I couldn't identify. But there were no signs of people. No footprints, no trash, no old fire pits. Nothing that would show someone had camped there. It felt untouched. As I walked further around the water, I saw something strange. In one small patch of mud, near where the trees grew tightly together, the ground looked like it had been stepped on. I couldn't tell if it was an animal or something else. It didn't look like a clean footprint, but the dirt looked pressed down, almost like something heavy had stood there. I stared at it for a moment, but I told myself it was probably just an animal. I kept walking and didn't think much more about it. When I returned to my tent, the sun had moved lower, and the shadows around the lake had grown longer. The air felt cooler. I collected some wood from the forest and made a small fire. I ate a simple meal. Everything felt calm, even though the silence around me stayed strong. It was the kind of quiet that made it easy to hear things far away. But I didn't hear anything except the wind and the soft movement of water. When the sun finally went down, the darkness came faster than I expected. The trees around the lake blocked most of the sky, so the light faded quickly. I used my flashlight to look around, but the beam only went so far before fading into the thick blackness between the trees. I felt a strange pressure in my chest, the kind that comes from being alone in a place you don't know. I tried to ignore it and told myself it was normal to feel uneasy when camping alone. I put out the fire before going into my tent because I didn't want the smoke to attract animals. Inside my tent, I zipped the door shut, got into my sleeping bag, and listened to the quiet. There were no sounds of people, no cars, no airplanes, nothing except the sound of my own breathing and the soft movement of the tent fabric when the wind touched it. I tried to sleep, but the quiet made it hard. At some point during the night, I heard a sound outside. It wasn't loud, but it didn't sound like an animal. It was slow, almost careful. It sounded like a foot pressing lightly on the ground. I stayed still and listened. The sound came again, slightly closer to my tent. I felt a cold feeling spread across my back as I tried to figure out what it could be. I told myself it was probably a deer or maybe a raccoon walking nearby, but the steps were slow, too slow for an animal. They sounded like someone trying not to make noise. I didn't move for a long time. I listened to the footsteps circle around the area near my tent. They were faint, but they were there. The steps paused every so often, as if whatever was out there was stopping to listen. My heart was beating so fast that I could hear it inside my ears. I waited for the steps to go away. After what felt like a long time, the footsteps moved away from my tent and disappeared into the distance. I waited even longer before I let myself breathe normally again. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I kept my eyes open in the darkness, listening to every tiny sound. The wind, the water, the insects. I tried to separate each noise from the one I heard earlier. When the sun finally came up, I stepped outside the tent and looked around. The ground was damp with morning dew, and the light through the trees made everything look soft. I walked around the area near my tent to see if I could find any tracks. I thought maybe I would see something that would show it was an animal and not a person. But the dirt near my tent looked uneven, like something had stepped on it. It didn't look like a clean human footprint, but it also didn't look like a regular animal track. The soil was pressed down in long shapes instead of round shapes. It looked like something dragging or sliding its feet instead of lifting them fully. I tried not to think too hard about it. I told myself it was probably nothing important. I tried to focus on enjoying the lake and the forest. But something felt different now. The silence felt heavier. The shadows looked darker. The feeling of being alone wasn't peaceful anymore. It felt tense, like the forest was watching me. I didn't want to pack up and leave right away, because I had planned for a few days at the lake. I reminded myself that I came for solitude. I told myself that hearing things at night was normal when camping alone. But even though I stayed, I felt uncomfortable the entire day. I tried to fish, but I kept looking over my shoulder. I tried to walk around the lake again, but I kept thinking about the footsteps. I tried to relax, but the quiet had changed. It felt sharper, almost unnatural. In the middle of the day, while I was eating near my fire pit, I saw something strange again. Across the lake, on the opposite shoreline, there was a shape between the trees. It wasn't clear. It wasn't moving. It just looked like something tall was standing there. I stared at it for a long time, trying to figure out what it was. The distance made it hard to see. I reached for my bag, where I kept my small binoculars. But when I looked back across the lake, the shape was gone. The space between the trees was empty again. I felt the same cold feeling in my chest that I felt the night before. I didn't know if what I saw was a person, a tree, a shadow, or something else. But the idea that someone could be on the other side of the lake watching me made my skin feel tight. I tried to tell myself that maybe my eyes played a trick on me. Maybe it was a tree the whole time. Maybe the light hit it in a strange way. But I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. By the time the sun began to go down again, I felt even more tense. I didn't want to spend another night there, but I also didn't want to hike through the forest in the dark. It would be too risky. I convinced myself that maybe nothing would happen that night. Maybe the footsteps were from some animal I didn't recognize. Maybe everything would be calm. I tried to eat dinner and keep my mind quiet. When the darkness came again, it felt heavier than the first night. The trees around the lake looked almost black, and the shoreline was hard to see. The air felt cold on my skin even though the temperature wasn't that low. I sat inside my tent, zipped it shut, and tried to force myself to be calm. I tried to breathe lightly so I could hear every sound outside. Hours passed. First, nothing happened. But then, sometime deep into the night, I heard the footsteps again. They sounded exactly like the night before. Slow, careful, and close. This time they came from the shoreline side, not from the forest side. I could hear the mud sticking to whatever was stepping through it. The sound was sticky and soft at the same time. My heart started beating harder. I stayed completely still. The footsteps moved closer to my tent, but they didn't move in a straight line. They circled around slowly, like someone was examining the area. The steps paused several times, and each time they paused, I felt like something was staring at my tent. The fabric of the tent moved slightly with the wind, but I felt like the air outside had gone still. I waited for the sound to move away, but it didn't. The footsteps circled my tent again, then again. Each time they got slower, almost like whoever was out there was unsure of what to do next. The air inside my tent felt hot from the tension. I was sweating even though I wasn't moving. Then the footsteps stopped right behind my tent, so close that I could hear the weight shift on the ground. I felt the dirt pressing from the outside, like something or someone was standing inches away from the fabric. I held my breath. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. The sound stayed there, not moving, not stepping, just standing. Minutes passed. Long, slow minutes that felt like hours. I felt trapped inside the tent, unable to see anything. The thin layer of fabric was the only thing between me and whatever was outside. Then, slowly, the footsteps moved away. First one soft step, then another. Then they got quieter and quieter until I couldn't hear them anymore. I stayed awake the entire night again. I didn't sleep at all. My muscles hurt from staying so tense, but I didn't want to move. I waited for the sun. When morning finally came, I stepped outside the tent with shaky legs. I looked at the ground behind my tent, where the footsteps had stopped. The dirt was clearly pressed down. The shape was long and uneven, not like an animal footprint. It looked like the imprint of a person who wasn't fully lifting their feet. The mud near the shoreline had similar prints, going toward the trees but not disappearing completely. I knew at that moment that I had to leave. I didn't care about staying for the rest of my planned trip. I didn't care about enjoying the lake anymore. Something was wrong. Someone was out there. Someone who didn't want me there, or someone who was watching me for reasons I couldn't understand. I packed my things fast. I didn't even eat breakfast. I stuffed everything into my backpack as quickly as I could. The whole time I kept looking around, expecting to see someone hiding behind a tree or standing on the other side of the lake. But I didn't see anyone. The forest was still, almost too still. When I was ready to leave, I took one last look at the lake. It looked calm, untouched, quiet. If someone had been out there, they left no clear sign except for the tracks near my tent. It made everything feel more strange. It made everything feel more real. I started walking back through the forest right away. The trees looked different now, almost threatening. Every sound I heard while walking, sticks snapping, leaves rustling, distant movement, made me look around quickly. I kept feeling like someone was behind me, even though I didn't hear footsteps anymore. The forest felt empty in a dangerous way, like someone could disappear into it easily. After walking for a long time, I looked back once, even though I didn't want to. I expected to see someone standing far behind me, but the forest was empty. Nothing was there. I kept walking without stopping. I didn't rest. I didn't take breaks. I just wanted to get back to my car. The feeling of being watched stayed with me the entire time. Even when I couldn't hear anything around me, the feeling didn't go away. It felt like someone was walking at the same pace as me, but far enough to stay hidden. When I finally reached the road and saw my car, I felt relief hit me so hard that my legs felt weak. I opened the car door, threw my backpack inside, and sat in the driver's seat for a moment to breathe. The forest around me was quiet, but the silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt like the same silence that surrounded the lake. I felt eyes on me even though I didn't see anyone. I started the engine and drove away without looking back again. When I got home, I tried to forget about the trip. I tried to tell myself that maybe I imagined some parts of it, or maybe the tracks were just from some animal I didn't know how to identify. But the more I thought about it, the more I remembered the slow footsteps circling my tent, the strange shaped tracks, the figure across the lake, and the feeling of something standing right behind me in the dark. I realized that the lake was too quiet for a reason. The forest was too empty for a reason. There was something out there, not something supernatural, not something impossible, but something human. Something or someone who didn't want to be seen. Someone who moved through that forest like they knew every inch of it. Someone who watched me all night. The most disturbing part is that I never saw the person. I never heard them speak. I never knew what they looked like. They never touched my tent. They never tried to come inside. They just watched. All night. They watched even when I thought they had left. What scares me the most is the question I still can't answer. If I didn't hear them leave at the same time I left, how do I know they didn't follow me deeper into the forest before I reached the road? I didn't hear footsteps that morning, but that doesn't mean there were no footsteps. I don't go camping alone anymore, not after knowing how easy it is for someone to be near you without you ever seeing their face. I did not plan anything special for that weekend. I only wanted a quiet place away from noise and people, so I packed my small tent, a sleeping bag, a few cans of food, a small stove, and a simple backpack. I chose an area I had only seen once before while driving past it, a place with tall, dusty trees and long, narrow valleys that broke the forest in wide lines. It wasn't a famous spot or anything. It was just a quiet patch of land with a trail that many people ignored. That was exactly why I picked it. I drove there in the late afternoon, parked on the side near a faded sign, and started walking deeper into the woods. The air felt dry, almost stale, like the sun had baked everything the entire day. I could smell the dust rising under my boots and the faint scent of pine needles crushed under my steps. The trail felt narrow, more like something animals used rather than humans. Branches scratched against my arms and legs with every few steps, and the deeper I went, the quieter it got until I could only hear my breathing and the slight shifting of my backpack straps. I stopped in a small open area that looked like it had not been touched for months. The ground was mostly flat with dry grass and tiny stones scattered across it. I dropped my backpack and looked around to make sure nothing looked unsafe. There were no steep drops, no dead trees leaning dangerously, no animal tracks that looked fresh. Felt normal. It felt like exactly what I wanted: isolation and stillness. I set up my tent slowly, taking the time to clear the ground of sharp rocks and pull the fabric tight. As I worked, the sky was turning orange. The sun was dipping behind the treeline, leaving long shadows that stretched like dark fingers across the ground. I took a breath of the cooling air and felt something calm wash over me. This was what I came for. Just quiet, no rush, nothing forcing me to think about anything. When I finished, I sat near the tent and ate a small meal. The forest turned darker with every minute. Birds stopped moving. Insects started humming low. Everything became one long, quiet sheet of sound. It was peaceful, until it wasn't. While I was cleaning up my things and packing away food, I heard something behind me, just a quick, soft crunch of dry leaves. It was small, nothing unusual, probably just a rabbit or something walking through the brush. I didn't even look at first, but then I heard another one, and another, slow, spread out, almost like footsteps, but too gentle to be sure. Still, it made me glance up. There was nothing, only trees and darkness settling in. I told myself it was just animals. I was deep in their home after all. It made sense. I finished cleaning up and got ready to sleep. Inside the tent, the air felt colder but also safe. I lay in my sleeping bag and rested there quietly. For a long time, nothing happened. I started drifting off, losing track of time. Then I heard it again. Crunch. But this time it was closer. Not loud, not heavy. Just slow, careful, like someone trying not to be heard at all. I kept still. My heart was beating harder now. I could feel each thump in my chest as if it wanted to burst out. The sound came again, but from a different direction, almost circling. The dry leaves outside reacted each time something stepped on them. I stayed quiet. I didn't move a muscle. I listened as hard as I could. Then everything stopped. Total silence. Not even the insects hummed anymore. I waited for some time, I don't even know how long. Eventually the sounds faded completely, or whoever or whatever was out there walked away quietly enough that I couldn't hear it anymore. My eyes stayed open in the darkness inside the tent. I didn't sleep for a long time. When morning came, the sun felt like relief. I stepped out of the tent and stretched. The ground around my campsite looked normal. No big tracks, no torn branches, just the same dry leaves and dust. It made me wonder if I just imagined it all. I ate breakfast slowly, trying to relax and push away the memory of last night. Then I noticed something. About 10 meters away, near a cluster of thin trees, The ground looked pressed down. It wasn't a footprint exactly, but more like someone had stood there for a while. The leaves were pushed flat in a clear circular pattern. I stared at it for a long time, trying to think of any animal that would stand still long enough to leave a patch like that. My mind kept going back to the soft crunch of the leaves. The slow steps. I walked toward the flattened spot and crouched down. The dirt underneath looked slightly disturbed, almost like a boot heel had slid gently across it. A small line cut into the soil. It wasn't deep, but it was too straight to be natural. That made my stomach tighten. Someone had been standing there, watching me, probably last night when I was inside the tent. I felt a cold wave move through me, but I tried to think logically. Maybe someone else was camping nearby, and they were just passing through. Maybe a hiker had walked by. The forest wasn't restricted. People came and went. Could have been nothing bad. But the slow steps circling my tent made it feel different. I tried not to panic. I told myself to stay calm. I still had the whole day ahead of me, and daylight made everything feel safe again. Still, I decided to be more alert. I spent the day walking around the area, exploring the trails. I carried my pack and kept my water bottle close. The forest looked normal. The wind moved gently through the trees. The sun was bright. Birds hopped between branches. Everything seemed calm. But no matter where I went, I always had this strange feeling. It was like someone was watching me from far away. I could never point to where. I just felt it. The hairs on my neck would rise randomly. My hands would tighten around the straps of my backpack. At one point, I stopped for a rest near a fallen log and had some water. When I looked behind me, I thought I saw something move behind a tree, just the edge of something dark. But when I stared at it, nothing moved. Could have been my eyes playing tricks on me, or maybe someone's shoulder pulling back behind the tree. Either way, I didn't stay there long. By the time I got back to camp, the sun was already dropping again. The sky turned from bright blue to a dusty gray. I started preparing dinner earlier than usual because I wanted everything done before it got fully dark. I kept looking over my shoulder every few minutes. That was when I noticed something else. Near one of the trees that bordered the open area of my camp, a branch had been snapped recently. The break was fresh, rough, and white. It hung downward like something heavy had stepped on it or someone brushed against it with force. I knew I didn't cause that. I hadn't walked near that tree at all. My mind started racing again. Was someone actually following me? Were they hiding somewhere in the trees now? Why would they do that? What did they want? As the sun faded, the entire forest grew darker and colder. My hands felt colder too, but it wasn't because of the air. It was because I was afraid, really afraid. But I tried to keep things normal. I cleaned up after eating, put my gear away, and got everything ready for sleep. The shadows stretched longer around my tent until I could barely see anything beyond a few steps. The forest became one big black mass. I crawled into the tent again and lay inside my sleeping bag. My ears felt sharp, like they were searching for every sound. I heard the leaves outside shift a little from the evening wind. I heard the small ticks of the tent fabric settling. I listened for anything else. For a long time, nothing happened. Then something made a sound far off. A light crack, like someone stepping on a twig. It wasn't close yet, but it was there. I held my breath. Every muscle in my body tightened. I waited, listening to the darkness. Another soft step. Slow, careful. The steps grew closer one at a time. I tried not to panic. I tried not to move. My heartbeat felt so loud that I worried it might echo out of the tent. The steps stopped again. I stared at the thin wall of fabric between me and the night. I imagined someone standing only a few meters away. Someone who waited until it was dark. Someone who had probably been following me since yesterday. Then the sound came from the left side of the tent. A very soft shifting of leaves. Something was definitely moving around me, slowly circling again. The same way as the night before. My mouth felt dry. I could feel sweat forming even though the air was cold. I stayed still for as long as I could, hoping maybe whoever it was would walk away. But they didn't. The steps moved again, getting even closer. I could hear the faint crunch under their feet. I knew it was a person now. No animal moved like that. No animal walked in a perfect slow circle around a tent. Then I heard breathing. Faint. Human. Just outside the thin nylon wall. My body froze. I didn't move. I didn't breathe fully. I just listened to that soft breathing right outside. Like someone was leaning over the tent, trying to look inside without making noise. I felt an urge to run. But where would I go? Into the dark woods with someone following me? I didn't even know what direction led back to the road in the pitch black. The breathing lasted a long time. Felt like forever. Then it suddenly stopped. I didn't hear footsteps walking away. I didn't hear anything at all. Nothing. Silence. I stayed awake for hours, barely blinking. Eventually, I must have passed out for a few minutes or an hour. I'm not sure, but when the first weak light of dawn touched the tent, I woke up instantly. I ripped the zipper open and stepped outside quickly, looking everywhere. He had been there. There were clear footprints now, pressed deeply into the soft patches of ground. Human footprints. A man's size. They circled the tent in a wide curve. Some stopped right beside the entrance, close enough that he could have reached out and touched the tent fabric. And there was something else. Right in front of the tent door, placed deliberately, was a long, thin stick jammed into the dirt, pointed upward like a marker. It hadn't been there the night before. Someone put it there as a sign. Maybe to scare me, maybe to tell me they were there, maybe as some kind of warning or message. That was enough for me. I packed everything as fast as I could. My hands were shaking. My breath felt short. I kept looking over my shoulder as I stuffed the sleeping bag into my pack, tore the tent down, and threw everything together without caring about the order. I needed to leave. I didn't care about being neat or organized. I didn't care about breakfast or anything else. I just needed to get back to the road. When I finally had everything packed, I started walking fast down the trail I came from. The forest looked different now. Every shadow felt like it was hiding someone. Every sound behind me made me turn my head. Halfway to the road, I noticed something that made me nearly stop breathing. Another footprint, fresh, on the trail behind me. He had followed the same path earlier. Maybe just before dawn. Maybe while I was still inside the tent. When I looked farther down the trail, I saw more. Each one spaced evenly. Each one pressed into the dusty soil like he had been walking slowly. I didn't know where he was now. I didn't know if he was still close. But I knew I needed to move faster. I didn't run at first because I didn't want to trip on roots or rocks. But my pace became almost a jog. My backpack bounced on my shoulders. Sweat ran down my back even though the air was cold. My heart felt like it was punching me from the inside. When I finally saw my car through the trees in the distance, the relief nearly made my knees weak. I rushed toward it, fumbling for my keys. My hands felt slippery and clumsy, but I managed to unlock the door. Before getting inside, I looked back down the trail one last time. There was no one there. No movement. No sound. Nothing. But the footprints on the trail stayed in my mind. I got in the car and drove away so fast that dust and gravel spun behind me in a loud spray. I didn't look back again. When I reached the main road, I finally felt a tiny bit safer. But even then, I kept checking my mirrors every few seconds. Every car behind me made me uneasy. Every person I saw walking along the roadside made something inside me tighten. When I got home, I unpacked slowly. My body felt exhausted. My legs felt shaky. Everything around me looked normal again, but my mind kept replaying the sounds from that night. The slow circling steps, the breathing right outside the tent. I realized something very clear then. Whoever that man was, he didn't come to steal anything. He didn't try to take my gear. He didn't touch my car. He didn't leave any sign that he wanted something physical. He only watched me, all night, 2 nights in a row. He only stood there, circling, waiting, staring. I thought about the stick he left in the ground in front of the tent. It wasn't random. It was placed directly where I would step out in the morning. It was meant to be seen. It was meant to let me know that he had been right there, watching me while I slept. I never went back to that place. I never even drove near that road again. Whenever I think about camping now, I remember how quiet the forest was. how close he stood outside, how he breathed so softly but close enough that I felt him through the thin wall of my tent. And the ending is simple, clear, and real. I planned the camping trip because I needed a break from everything. I had been working long hours, barely sleeping, barely eating right, and I felt like my head was just buzzing all day. I wanted silence, a place where I could hear the wind and the water and nothing else. I chose a forest that was about 4 hours from my home, a place known for long trails and quiet campsites that weren't crowded. I picked a weekend when the weather report said clear skies. I wanted to be alone, but I wanted it to feel safe too. I convinced myself it would be simple and calm. Just me, the trees, and a small campfire. That was all I wanted. The drive felt long, and I kept thinking about how empty the road became after the last small town. The houses became fewer, and soon it was just trees on both sides, tall and thick, blocking the sunlight. The shadows looked deeper as I drove farther in, but I didn't think much of it. I thought nature always looked like that when it wasn't touched by people. When I reached the parking area near the trailhead, I saw only one other car, an old dark SUV with mud on the sides. It looked like it had been there for a while. Dust covered the windows. I didn't see anyone around it, and it made me feel like I had the whole place to myself. I got my backpack on, grabbed my small cooler and tent bag, and locked the car. The air felt cool and fresh, and the smell of pine trees made me feel calmer. I took the trail that went deeper into the forest, following the signs toward a campsite that I had picked out on a map earlier. It was supposed to be near a small stream, a good distance from the busier spots. I liked the thought of having my own small corner of the forest. As I walked, I listened to the sounds around me. The crunch of dry leaves under my boots, the wind moving the branches above me, and the occasional rustle from some small animal moving in the bushes. For the first hour, it felt peaceful. I didn't rush. I took my time, looking around, taking deep breaths, letting my head clear from the noise of daily life. But then something small changed. About halfway along the trail, I saw footprints on the ground. At first, that didn't surprise me. People hiked here all the time, but these footprints looked fresh. The edges weren't soft or washed out by wind. The dirt around them was still loose, like they had been made not long before I arrived. They led in the same direction I was going. I stopped and looked around. Nothing, just trees and more trees. I kept walking. As I went deeper, I noticed something else. Every now and then, I felt like I heard steps behind me. Not constant ones, just one or two at a time, like someone stepping lightly, then stopping. Every time I turned around, all I saw were trees and shadows. I tried to brush it off. Forests had strange sounds. Sometimes branches fell. Sometimes animals moved in the underbrush. I forced myself not to think too much about it. The trail eventually opened into a clearing where a narrow stream flowed quietly. The campsite area wasn't an official campground. It was a small patch of dirt near the water where others had set up their tents before. The ground showed old fire rings and flattened grass. I liked the spot, felt hidden and quiet. I set my pack down, stretched my shoulders, and started setting up my tent. As I worked, I kept getting that same strange feeling that someone was close. It wasn't fear at first, just a prickling on the back of my neck. Every now and then I stood up straight, listened carefully, and only heard the wind or the stream. Nothing more. I told myself I was tired from the drive and the hike. Maybe that was making me jumpy. By late afternoon, the tent was up, my sleeping bag rolled out, and my small foldable chair was set near the water. I ate a small meal from my cooler, drank some water, and rested my legs. I listened to the stream and felt like I was finally getting that peace I wanted. But then, when I walked a little ways behind the campsite to gather some wood for a small fire later, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. About 20 yards from my tent, half hidden between two trees, there was a pile of rocks that looked like they didn't belong there. They were stacked, not naturally fallen. Someone had put them there. They formed a small tower, uneven but clearly arranged by a person. At first, I thought maybe a hiker made it as a marker or just for fun. But the rocks looked recently moved, the dirt around them disturbed. fresh. I stood there for a moment, staring at it. Felt out of place. I couldn't explain why, but it bothered me. I looked around again. Again, nothing. No movement, no sound besides the stream. I tried to ignore the odd feeling and went back to collecting wood. As the sun lowered, the shadows got longer, and the forest seemed to get quieter. I lit a small fire once it got dark, just enough for warmth and comfort. I sat near it, eating again, listening to the crackle of the flames. I looked up at the sky, seeing stars starting to appear through the small openings between the trees. But even with the fire and the quiet night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone out there. When the fire burned low and the night grew colder, I decided to get into my tent. I zipped the flap closed, crawled into my sleeping bag, and tried to relax. I listened to the sounds outside. At first it was just the stream, the wind, and the small popping noises from the last bits of the fire. My breathing slowed. I felt my body start to settle. Then I heard it, a soft crunching of leaves. Slow, steady, like footsteps. Very light, very controlled. Not an animal rushing around. It was too slow for that. It sounded like someone trying to move quietly but failing to be completely silent. My heart started beating faster. I stayed still, trying to listen closely. The sound came from the direction of the trees where I had seen the stacked rocks earlier. I felt my hands get cold even though I was wrapped inside my bag. The steps grew closer, then stopped, then nothing. Minutes passed, and the silence felt heavy. I didn't move. I didn't breathe loudly. I felt like if I made a single sound, whoever or whatever was out there would know exactly where I was. I told myself it could be a deer or something similar, but the steps had been too controlled, too human. Eventually, after what felt like an hour but was probably only a few minutes, I heard nothing else. My fear stayed, but my body was too tired to stay alert. Slowly, without even realizing, I drifted into sleep. I woke up later in the night because the air felt colder inside the tent. I looked around in the dark, confused. Then I realized something that sent a wave of panic through me. The tent flap was slightly open. Not fully, just a small gap, like someone had unzipped it just enough to peek inside. I knew I had fully zipped it before sleeping. I never left it open even a little. The gap wasn't wide, but it was clearly unzipped about 3 inches. I froze. I didn't hear anything outside. The forest was dead silent. Too silent. I stayed still for a long time, staring at that small opening, waiting for something, anything to happen. My mind kept imagining someone's eye watching me through that slit. I felt a shiver run down my spine. After a long time of nothing happening, I slowly reached forward and zipped it shut again as quietly as I could. My hand was shaking. I couldn't sleep after that. I lay awake for hours, listening to every sound, waiting for footsteps again. Nothing came. Eventually, I drifted into a weak half-sleep. When morning came, the forest looked normal again. Sunlight came through the trees, birds made noise, and everything looked harmless. But the fear from the night stayed with me. I stepped out of the tent slowly, scanning the area. I walked around, looking at the ground. That's when I saw the footprints. Clear shoe prints. In the dirt, near the tent. Someone had walked right up to it. The prints came from the trees and stopped only a few feet from the tent door. Then they turned around and went back the same way. My heart crawled up my throat when I saw that. Confirmed everything I had feared. Someone had been out there. Someone had come close enough to touch my tent. Maybe they did touch it. I decided right then that I needed to leave as soon as possible. I packed up my things quickly, trying not to think about the night too much. I wanted to be back on the trail and headed toward the main road. But as I started packing, I noticed something else that made the hair on my arms stand up. The pile of rocks I had seen the day before, the one between the trees, it was different now. Taller, with more rocks added. Someone had been back there during the night. Someone had been moving around in the dark, near my campsite, while I slept. I stuffed the rest of my gear into my backpack and started walking fast down the trail. I kept looking over my shoulder. Every rustle made me jump. My steps were quick, and I felt like something was behind me the whole time. After about 15 minutes of walking, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Ahead of me, on the trail, the dirt looked disturbed. More footprints, but this time they were fresh. Very fresh. The edges were sharp. Whoever made them had walked through only minutes before, and they were heading the same direction I was heading. Someone was ahead of me on the trail, walking slowly, like they knew I would eventually follow. I stopped walking, heart pounding. If I kept going forward, I might catch up to them. If I stayed too long, they might stop and wait for me. I felt trapped between two choices that both felt wrong. The forest around me felt too quiet again. No wind, no birds, just silence, heavy and tense. I decided to keep going but move quietly. I walked slower, trying not to break branches under my feet. I tried to breathe quietly. Every few steps, I looked behind me. Nothing. After a long stretch of moving carefully, I reached a part of the trail with a small hill that allowed me to see farther ahead. I climbed it slowly and looked down the path. First I saw nothing. Then I saw movement. A man. He stood at the bend in the trail, about 100 yards away. He wasn't walking. He wasn't looking around. He was standing completely still, facing the direction I was coming from, like he had been waiting. He wore dark clothing. His posture was stiff. His head was slightly tilted, like he was trying to listen for something. For me, I ducked down behind a fallen log and hid. My breath felt tight in my chest. I waited to see what he would do. After a few seconds, he took a few slow steps forward, then stopped again. He wasn't hiking. He wasn't out here for nature. He was moving in a way that made my skin crawl. I waited until he moved farther down the trail and disappeared around another bend. As soon as he was out of sight, I left the trail and stepped into the forest, moving through the trees parallel to the path. The ground was uneven, the brush thick, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to walk behind that man. I wanted distance between us. For almost an hour, I moved through the trees, trying to stay close enough to the trail to not get lost but far enough to not be seen. Every sound made me freeze. My legs felt weak and sore from moving over fallen branches and rough ground. Eventually, I reached a spot where the forest thinned a little, and I could see the parking area in the distance. Relief washed over me, but only for a moment, because the man was standing near my car. He wasn't touching it. He wasn't trying to break in. He was just standing there like he had been waiting, his posture stiff again, head turned slightly toward the trail entrance. I dropped to my stomach behind a thick bush. My hands were shaking so hard I could feel the leaves tremble under them. I watched him. He didn't move for a long time. He just stood there, facing the trail like he knew I would come out eventually. It was like he had been following me, watching me, waiting for the right moment to do something I didn't want to think about. I stayed hidden for at least 20 minutes. Eventually, he turned and slowly walked toward the far side of the parking lot, disappearing behind a cluster of trees. When he was completely out of sight, I got up and rushed to my car, unlocked it, threw my gear in without caring how messy it looked, and got inside. My hands were shaking so badly I struggled to get the key into the ignition. When the engine started, I felt a small wave of relief, but it didn't last long. As I drove out of the parking area and onto the road, I glanced into the rearview mirror. He was standing at the edge of the trees again, watching my car leave. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I kept driving until I reached the main road, then the town, and eventually home. When I got home, I sat in my parked car for a long time, shaking, thinking about everything. I kept seeing that tent flap slightly unzipped. Those footprints, that pile of rocks, that man on the trail standing still like he was waiting. I realized how close I came to something terrible without even knowing it at the time. I never went back to that forest again. I never camped alone again either. The ending was clear in my mind as the days passed. I learned something important. The scariest thing in the woods isn't an animal or some story about ghosts. It's a real person with bad intentions. Someone who studies your steps, follows your trail, watches you while you sleep, and waits for a moment when you're most vulnerable. That trip showed me how thin the line is between peaceful isolation and dangerous isolation. I thought I was going there for peace, but instead I walked straight into someone else's silent plans. And the worst part is knowing that whoever he was, he's still out there somewhere, walking those same trails, maybe waiting for the next person who decides to camp alone. I drove out to a quiet lake that was a little far from the main road. I wanted the trip to be peaceful because I had been feeling drained for weeks. The lake was not famous and not many people came to it, which was the reason I chose it. I liked places where I could hear my own breathing more clearly than any noise from cars or other people. The road to the lake was narrow and rough enough that most people didn't bother visiting. I liked that about it. When I reached the small dirt clearing that people used as a parking spot, I turned off the engine and sat still for a few seconds. The silence felt thick. I could hear only the engine ticking as it cooled and a soft breeze pushing through tall grass. The lake was maybe a 10-minute walk downhill from the clearing. I checked my watch and noticed the sun was still high enough that I had time to set up camp before it got dark. I pulled out my backpack, cooking gear, tent, and a few other things I needed. I liked checking everything twice because I always worried I might forget something small and then regret it later. The trail to the lake was narrow with dry dirt under my shoes. I could hear the crunch each time I stepped. On both sides of the trail, tall, thin trees made long shadows that cut across the path. The air smelled like pine needles and damp soil. After a few minutes of walking, the lake came into view through a gap between the trees. The water looked calm and almost perfect. There were no ripples except a few circles caused by small insects landing on the surface. I walked around the lake until I reached a flat area close to the water. Someone had used the place before because there was a small ring of rocks showing where a fire pit had been. The rocks looked old, and there was nothing inside the pit except ash and bits of charcoal. Whoever used it had not been there recently. I liked that. It made the spot feel empty and untouched. I dropped my backpack near the fire ring and looked around carefully. I made sure the ground was level enough for the tent and far enough from the water so that moisture wouldn't reach it during the night. I collected stones to reinforce the fire ring even though I wasn't sure I would light a fire. Something about the place felt peaceful, but also strangely isolated in a deeper way. Maybe because I had not seen a single person or vehicle since I left the paved road. The absence of people sometimes made me feel free, but other times it made me feel like I was too far away from help if something went wrong. After setting up the tent, I walked to the shoreline. The water was cold when I touched it. It felt clean and fresh, and I cupped some of it and splashed my face. A thin layer of coldness stayed on my skin. I looked across the lake and didn't see anything except trees. There were no cabins, no boats, nothing man-made. The lake felt like it belonged to another time when people had not yet reached it. I liked that feeling. As the sun lowered toward the trees behind me, the air grew colder. I sat near the tent and ate a simple meal. The quietness was strong enough that I could hear the soft chewing sound inside my own head. I watched the water turn from blue to gold as the sunlight hit it at a low angle. The sky slowly changed to a deeper shade. When the sun finally disappeared completely, the temperature dropped faster than I expected. I put on a jacket and walked around to stretch my legs before getting inside the tent. The first sign that something felt wrong came when I noticed a strange pattern of footprints near the far side of the lake. They were not fresh enough to be from that day, but they were not old either. They were shaped like human footprints but slightly distorted, maybe because of the wet soil. The footprints led toward the tree line and then disappeared. I stared at them for a while, trying to guess if someone else had camped here recently. There was no trash, no leftover gear, no signs of a camp. Just those footprints. I told myself they were probably from someone who visited earlier in the week. I turned back to my tent, but I kept thinking about them. They looked too clean and too spaced, like someone had walked slowly and carefully. I brushed the thought away because I didn't want it to start controlling my mind or ruining my night. When it became completely dark, I got inside the tent. The inside felt warm at first, but then the air cooled again and made the thin fabric feel like it wasn't blocking anything. I lay down on my sleeping bag and listened to the night sounds. There were insects and a distant owl. Nothing unusual, but after some time, the sounds faded and the silence returned. The silence felt heavier than before, like something was waiting. I must have stayed awake longer than I realized because my eyes began to feel tired. Just when I was close to drifting off, I heard something that made my entire body freeze. There were footsteps outside the tent. Slow ones, the kind a person makes when they are trying not to be heard. First, I wondered if it was a deer, but the sound was too controlled. Deer make uneven, light sounds. These sounds were steady and slow. Someone or something was walking around my campsite, circling it. I held my breath without even noticing that I was doing it. My heart was pounding so loud I thought it might give away my position. The footsteps went behind the tent and then stopped. The silence that followed felt worse than the sound itself. My mind filled with thoughts about the footprints I saw earlier. Maybe they were more recent than I thought. Maybe whoever made them was still here. Maybe they had been watching me since before sunset. I stayed completely still. The tent fabric barely moved except when a breeze pushed through it. I waited for another sound, and after what felt like a long time, I heard breathing. Not animal breathing. It was too slow, too controlled. The sound was faint but close, like someone was standing right next to the tent wall. I felt my skin crawl with cold. The breathing lasted for a few seconds, then it stopped suddenly, like whoever was out there didn't want to reveal anything more. My mind raced. I had no idea if the person was armed, dangerous, or simply curious. But the way they moved made it feel wrong. No normal camper walks around someone else's tent after midnight. I reached into my backpack slowly and found my flashlight. I held it tightly but didn't turn it on. I didn't want the light to draw attention to me. I just held it like something I could use if I needed to defend myself. Minutes passed, or maybe longer. Time felt strange because my body was tense and every second felt stretched out. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a soft rustling near the lake. It sounded like someone brushing through grass. I tried to picture where the sound came from. It was close to where I had earlier seen the footprints. Then a splash, like a stone being thrown into the water. I felt a deep, heavy fear inside my chest. Whoever was out there was not just passing by. They were staying close and doing things quietly on purpose. Maybe they were testing if I would come out. Maybe they wanted me to react. I stayed inside the tent. I didn't move. I didn't make a sound. I felt like any noise would make everything worse. The hours crawled by. I didn't sleep at all. I just stayed still, listening for every tiny sound. Sometimes I thought I heard movement near the trees, but I couldn't be sure. The darkness outside felt endless. Around early morning, when the sky turned from black to dark blue, I finally felt like the danger was fading. The night sounds were returning. Birds started making small noises. The world felt alive again. Whatever had been there probably left before dawn. I waited until the sky had enough light for me to see shapes clearly. Then I slowly unzipped the tent and stepped outside. The cold air hit my face with strength. I looked around the campsite very carefully. There were fresh footprints in the dirt, clear ones. They circled my tent exactly as I thought. The prints were deeper near the back of the tent, where the person stood still for some time. The footsteps near the lake were new too. I followed them to the shoreline and saw a spot where the ground was disturbed, like someone stood there for a while or crouched down. I scanned the opposite tree line, expecting to see someone watching me, but there was nothing. The prints led into the trees but stopped after a few meters because the forest floor was too firm and covered with pine needles. There was no way to track the person further. I felt a strong urge to pack everything and leave right away. I didn't bother cooking breakfast or sitting down. I shook the tent aggressively to remove dirt and stuffed it into my pack. My hands were shaking slightly. I kept looking around because I felt like the person could still be nearby, watching from between the trees. As I walked back up the trail toward the parking area, I kept checking behind me. The trees looked normal, silent, innocent, but the memory of the footprints made every shadow feel suspicious. My steps were faster than usual, and my breathing was shallow. When I reached the clearing, I saw my car exactly where I left it, but something felt off. The driver's side door was slightly open. Not fully, just a crack. I never leave my door like that. I always shut it firmly. The crack was small enough that I might not have noticed it in the dark. But now, in daylight, I saw it clearly. I felt a chill race down my spine. I looked inside the car through the window. Nothing looked disturbed. The seats were the same. My bag of snacks on the passenger seat was untouched. But the fact that the door was open even slightly meant someone had been there. I approached slowly, looking around one more time, making sure the forest was empty. When I reached the car, I saw something on the door handle. A small smear of dirt, the same dark dirt that covered the ground near the lake. I wiped it away even though I didn't know why I did that. Maybe a part of me didn't want proof left behind. I got inside the car, locked the doors immediately, and started the engine. My hands were cold and stiff, and the keys almost slipped from my fingers. When the engine came to life, I felt a small sense of safety return, but not enough to calm me fully. As I drove back to the main road, I kept checking the rearview mirror. The forest behind me looked the same as any other forest, but knowing someone had been walking around my tent, breathing near me, and standing by the lake in the darkness made it impossible to feel relaxed. The farther I got from the lake, the more real everything felt. The thought that someone might have followed me, watched me set up camp, and then waited for nightfall made my skin crawl. I kept thinking about the footprints circling the tent. The slow, careful steps were not the steps of a lost hiker or someone passing through. They were the steps of someone who walked close on purpose. By the time I reached the highway, I finally felt like I had put enough distance between myself and that lake. But the feeling of being watched stayed with me for days. At night, when I tried to sleep in my own bed, I kept imagining the sound of footsteps outside my window. Every soft noise made me jump. It took a long time before I could sleep normally again. I never reported what happened because there was nothing clear to report. No crime, no attack, no direct threat. Just footsteps, breathing, footprints, and a car door slightly open. But in my mind, it was enough to know something was wrong. I have never gone back to that lake. I don't even drive near the area anymore. I learned something on that trip, something that changed how I look at quiet places. I realized that nature itself is not what makes remote places dangerous. The trees, the water, the animals, the cold, none of those things frightened me. What terrified me was the thought of another person hiding in the dark with unknown intentions. A person who walks slowly around a tent in the middle of the night is not someone who needs help or company. A person who stands still close enough for you to hear their breathing is not someone who is lost. Since that trip, whenever I camp, I choose areas where at least some people pass by. I keep my car doors double-checked. I stay alert even when everything seems peaceful. I still enjoy nature, but not in the same way. The peace feels thinner now, as if something could break it at any moment. The silence feels deeper, but also more threatening. The worst part is the question that keeps returning to my mind whenever I think about that night. If the person outside my tent had wanted to do something to me, why didn't they? The only answer that makes sense is that maybe they didn't want anything that night. Maybe they were just studying. Maybe they were just watching. Maybe they wanted to see how I reacted. Maybe they were planning something for another night with someone else who wouldn't wake up in time. That thought has stayed with me longer than the fear. It's the detail that makes the story feel unfinished inside my mind, even though the experience itself is over. But the ending is clear. I survived because I stayed still, silent, and aware. I left before daylight fully exposed anything or anyone who might have been waiting just beyond the trees. And I learned that the real danger in isolated places is not nature, but the quiet footsteps of someone who knows how to move without being seen. I never saw the person. I never heard their voice. I never found out who they were. And that is exactly why the story still sits in my mind, heavy and real. It wasn't a ghost. It wasn't a creature. It was a human being. And sometimes that is the scariest thing you can meet in the dark. I went out to camp alone because I wanted a break from everything around me. My life felt heavy, and I needed space where nobody knew my name or what I was doing. I picked a remote area deep in the mountains where an old logging road ran through dense pine forest. The road had been closed for years, which meant almost nobody passed through it anymore. I liked the idea of that. I wanted silence. I wanted long nights where I could sit by a fire and forget about the world. I thought I understood what the forest felt like, but the first night out there made me realize how wrong I was. I arrived just before sunset. The air felt cool and dry. The pine needles covered the ground like a brown carpet, and the weak evening light made the area look calm. There was a large open spot just off the old road where the ground was level enough for a tent. It looked perfect. I parked the car a bit farther down the road to keep it hidden, and then I started setting up camp. I worked slowly, trying to enjoy the moment. I listened to the wind moving through the trees and the sound of small animals rustling in the brush. It felt peaceful at first, almost too peaceful. By the time I had my tent up and my small fire started, the sky had turned dark blue. The mountains formed big black shapes around me, and the night settled like a huge weight. I ate a simple meal while sitting on a fallen log near the fire. The fire crackled and popped, sending little sparks upward into the darkness. I felt tired but comfortable. This was exactly what I needed. When the fire burned low, I put it out and crawled into my tent. The cold air pressed against the fabric, and the thin sleeping bag wasn't doing much to help. I curled up and listened to the distant sounds of the forest. First, everything felt normal. Then I heard a sound that didn't fit with anything else. It came from somewhere far down the old logging road. It was a soft, steady crunching, almost like someone walking slowly and carefully over dry pine needles. The steps were spaced too far apart to be an animal like a deer, and they were too steady to be something light like a fox. I stayed still and tried to convince myself it was nothing. The steps faded away after a few minutes, but I kept listening in case they came back. Nothing else happened that night, but I barely slept. The sound kept replaying in my head over and over, making me think about who or what would walk on an abandoned logging road so late at night. In the morning, the forest looked normal again. The sunlight broke through the trees and warmed up the cold air. For a moment, it felt like the night had just been my imagination. I tried to put it behind me. I made breakfast, then walked around the area to explore. I followed the old road for a while, stepping over fallen branches and old tire ruts that had turned into shallow pits filled with dirt and leaves. About half a mile down the road, I noticed fresh footprints on a patch of soft ground. They were human footprints, and they looked recent. The sight of them made my stomach tighten. It didn't make sense for anyone else to be out there. The road didn't lead anywhere useful anymore, and the nearest active trail was miles away. I stood there for a long time, staring at the footprints, trying to decide if I should pack up and leave. But a part of me didn't want to give up my trip so easily. I convinced myself it was probably some hunter passing through or someone hiking off trail for fun. I told myself it was nothing to worry about. Still, I walked back to camp slower than before, scanning the trees on both sides of the road. I heard the occasional movement in the underbrush, but I didn't see anything. When I reached my camp, everything looked exactly how I had left it. Nothing had been touched. That calmed me a little, but not enough to relax fully. I spent the rest of the day gathering firewood, boiling water, and trying to keep myself busy. When night came again, the fear from the previous night returned. I tried to stay awake as long as I could, sitting by the fire and listening to the forest. When the fire died down and I couldn't hold my eyes open anymore, I climbed into the tent and tried to sleep. The same sound came again. Slow steps on the old road. Slow, careful, spaced-out steps. This time the steps were closer. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. The sound moved steadily down the road, then stopped. I lay there completely still, barely breathing. The forest felt dead silent. I waited for the steps to start again, but they didn't. The silence grew heavier until my ears started ringing. Then I heard something worse, the sound of dry pine needles being crushed right near my camp. Someone was walking on the ground just outside the tree-line. I kept frozen in place. I didn't move a muscle. The steps circled slowly around the area, always staying just far enough from the tent that I couldn't see anything through the fabric. I imagined someone standing there, watching the tent shape in the darkness. The footsteps moved for so long that I lost track of time. Eventually, they faded away into the forest. I didn't sleep at all that night. As soon as the sky started getting faintly lighter, I crawled out of the tent. The air felt colder than ever, and I felt a deep pressure in my chest. I walked the perimeter of my camp, checking the ground. I found clear footprints near the trees. They were the same ones I saw earlier on the road. Same size, same shape, fresh. Someone had walked right behind my tent. I thought about packing up and leaving immediately, but I also felt a strange kind of stubbornness. I didn't want to panic and run. I wanted to believe it was just some random stranger passing through. Maybe a hunter, maybe someone hiking alone like me. But the slow steps around my tent didn't feel like someone just passing through. They felt like someone watching. I spent the whole day tense and alert. Every sound made me jump. Even the normal calls of birds sounded strange. I kept turning my head, expecting to see someone standing between the trees. The sunlight didn't help. It made long shadows across the forest floor, and each shadow felt like it could be hiding someone. By late afternoon, the feeling of being watched had grown so strong that I couldn't ignore it anymore. I noticed the forest had gone unusually quiet. Even the wind seemed to stop. It felt like the whole place was holding its breath. I kept looking at the treeline, and at one point I saw something move. I couldn't see clearly what it was, but I caught a glimpse of something dark slipping behind a thick tree trunk. That was when I told myself I needed to leave at first light. I couldn't stay another night. The fear had grown too heavy, but I still had to get through one more night. I cooked a quick meal before the sun fully set, not wanting to be outside in the dark any more than necessary. I left the fire burning longer than usual to give myself more light. I tried to stay awake as long as possible, but the exhaustion from the previous sleepless nights finally caught up to me. I must have drifted off because I woke up to the faint sound of cracking wood. It wasn't the normal pop of the fire. It was a sharp snap from somewhere in the trees. I lay there in the tent, staring into the darkness, trying to tell if I had dreamed the noise. Then I heard another snap. Then another. They were slow and steady, almost like someone stepping on sticks on purpose. The steps grew closer. I felt the urge to unzip the tent and run, but I was too scared to move. The footsteps came right up to the edge of my camp. I heard breathing, slow, heavy breathing. It was close enough that I could feel the presence of someone standing just a few feet from where I lay. I held my breath. The figure moved around the tent slowly, just like the night before, but this time the steps came even closer. At one point, I saw a faint shadow pass across the fabric. Someone was standing directly beside the tent. My body went numb. I couldn't think. I couldn't move. I couldn't even feel my hands. The presence stood there for so long that I thought I might faint. Eventually, the steps moved again, circling around as if the person was studying every angle of my tent. Then everything went silent. I stayed frozen, waiting for something else to happen. Minutes passed, or maybe it was hours. Couldn't tell. The silence felt thick and heavy. I finally gathered enough courage to reach for the zipper of my sleeping bag, but before I touched it, I heard another sound. Something brushing against the side of the tent. I almost stopped breathing. It was soft and slow, almost like someone dragging their fingertips along the fabric. The dragging sound moved from one side of the tent to the other, and then it stopped right at the back of the tent across from where I lay. That was when I finally understood something I had been trying not to admit. This person wasn't lost. This wasn't a random hiker. This wasn't someone wandering by mistake. This person was watching me deliberately. This person was studying my camp. This person was giving attention to every detail of where I slept, where my backpack was, where my fire pit was, where my car was. This person was stalking me. I lay awake until dawn, gripping my pocket knife even though I knew it wouldn't save me from someone who had been moving through the forest like a shadow. When the sky finally grew light enough to see, I unzipped the tent as quietly as I could and stepped outside. The cold air hit me, but I barely noticed it because my mind was racing. I walked around my camp slowly, checking the ground again. The footprints were everywhere. They circled the tent multiple times. They came within inches of where my head had been. I even saw a fresh boot print right by the entrance of the tent. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely pack my things. I stuffed everything into my bag without caring about the order. I kicked dirt over the faint remains of the fire and swung the pack onto my shoulders. I didn't know if the person was still nearby, and I didn't want to find out. I walked down the old road toward my car at a fast pace, trying to stay alert while also keeping my steps quiet. The forest was still too silent, like it was watching me. I kept looking behind me every few seconds, expecting to see someone following. The trees felt closer than before. The air felt thicker. When I reached the spot where I had parked my car, my stomach dropped. There were footprints around it. Fresh ones. They went right up to the driver's side window and then circled around to the back. Whoever had been watching me had also inspected my car while I slept. I unlocked the door with shaking hands and got in as fast as I could. I locked the doors, started the engine, and drove away. I kept checking the rearview mirror over and over again, expecting to see someone running after me. I didn't slow down until I reached the main road. Even then, it took a long time before I felt like I could breathe normally again. When I got home, I didn't tell anyone what happened. It didn't feel like something I could explain easily. It felt unreal, even though I knew every part of it was real. I kept thinking about the footsteps, the breathing, the slow walk around my tent, the dragging sound along the fabric, and the footprints around my camp. I kept thinking about how close that person had been to me, standing just inches away while I lay there pretending to sleep. The worst part is not knowing what the person wanted. They didn't try to talk. They didn't take anything. They didn't attack. They just watched. They studied me night after night, moving closer each time. Felt like they were waiting for something. Maybe a moment when I would step outside at the wrong time. Maybe a moment when I would fall into a deep sleep. Maybe they were testing me to see how aware I was. I haven't gone camping alone again since that trip. I still feel something crawl under my skin every time I think about it. I still imagine someone walking slowly along an abandoned road in the middle of the night, watching the trees, looking for movement, waiting for another lone camper to settle in for the night. The ending is clear for me now. I left that forest because I finally understood something important. There are places out there where the danger isn't an animal, a storm, or some fantasy creature. Sometimes the real danger is another person who knows how to move through the forest quietly, who knows how to wait for hours without making a sound, and who finds a stranger sleeping alone in a tent interesting enough to study night after night. And if I had stayed one more night, I don't think I would have walked out of that forest at all. I had been planning this camping trip for months, marking the days on my calendar, checking maps, reading trail guides, and watching videos about the area I had chosen. I wanted a remote spot, one that was far from other hikers, far from cell service, far from any sign of modern life. I thought it would be the perfect place to clear my mind, to escape the constant hum of the city, and to feel completely alone in the wilderness. The thought of the silence, the fresh air, the untouched forest, and the clear night sky filled me with excitement and a quiet sense of anticipation. I packed carefully, overpacking really, but I wanted to be prepared. My backpack was heavy with food, water, camping gear, a first aid kit, and extra layers of clothing. I double-checked my tent and sleeping bag, making sure every zipper worked and every strap was secure. I had learned from past trips that a minor mistake in preparation could become a major problem when you were miles from civilization. The drive to the trailhead was long. I left early in the morning, the sun just starting to stretch its light over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. The roads narrowed as I climbed higher into the mountains, the asphalt giving way to dirt and gravel, and finally to a rough, rocky track that seemed barely wide enough for my car. I parked at the trailhead, checked my gear again, and started walking, the backpack heavy on my shoulders, the air crisp and cold against my face. First, the trail was easy. It wound through pine forests, the ground soft underfoot with a layer of needles, the smell of the trees filling my senses. Birds called in the distance, and a few squirrels darted between the trees, their tiny claws scratching the bark as they climbed. I felt peaceful, almost euphoric. The kind of peaceful that makes you forget the world outside, the kind of calm that is rare and precious. Hours passed as I followed the trail. It was well marked at first, but gradually it narrowed, and the markers became infrequent. I checked my map frequently, making mental notes of landmarks, small streams, and rock formations. The forest grew denser, the the sunlight filtering through the branches in scattered beams, creating shifting patterns on the ground. I felt like I was entering a different world, one untouched by human hands, one that had remained the same for decades, maybe centuries. The sound of the wind through the trees, the rustle of leaves under my boots, and the distant call of a hawk were the only noises that accompanied me. Occasionally, I would cross a small stream, the water icy and clear, rushing over smooth stones, and I would fill my water bottle, grateful for the natural source. I felt strong and capable, confident in my skills and my preparation. By late afternoon, I found what I thought would be the perfect camping spot. A small clearing beside a slow-moving creek, surrounded by tall pines and birches, the ground soft and mostly flat. I set my backpack down and started setting up camp. I pitched my tent carefully, driving stakes into the ground, checking every seam, making sure it was secure. I gathered firewood, stacking small branches and dry twigs in a neat pile, then larger logs nearby. I knew the fire would be important not just for warmth and cooking but for comfort. The simple act of watching flames can make you feel safe even when you are alone in the wilderness. The sun dipped lower in the sky as I finished setting up, the forest taking on shades of deep green and gold, the creek reflecting the fading light. I lit a small fire, the scent of burning wood filling the air, and prepared a simple meal of rice and beans, the warmth of the fire comforting as the shadows lengthened. The first night was quiet, almost unnaturally so. The forest seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting. I lay in my sleeping bag, staring at the inside of my tent, listening to the night sounds. The occasional snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, and the distant cry of an animal were the only interruptions. I felt a thrill of isolation, a mixture of fear and excitement. I had chosen this spot for solitude, and I was getting it. But as the night wore on, the sounds seemed to grow closer, sharper, more deliberate. First, I thought it was my imagination. But then I heard the sound of something moving near the edge of the clearing. A heavy rustling, like branches being pushed aside, leaves crunching under weight. I froze, listening. The sound stopped. I tried to tell myself it was just an animal, maybe a deer or a raccoon, but it was too large, too deliberate. My heartbeat quickened. I stayed still, straining my ears, gripping my flashlight, ready to turn it on at the first sign of movement. Eventually, the sounds faded, and I managed to fall asleep, though my sleep was restless. I dreamed of the forest closing in, shadows moving toward me, the wind whispering threats I could not understand. When I woke, the sun was just beginning to rise, pale light spilling through the trees. I felt drained but relieved that nothing had come near my tent during the night. I broke camp, refilled my water, ate a quick breakfast, and started hiking further into the wilderness. I had chosen a longer loop trail that would take me deeper into the mountains, past ridges and small lakes, and hopefully back to my starting point by the end of the day. As I hiked, the terrain became more difficult. The trail rose sharply, rocks and roots making footing precarious. I moved slowly, carefully, keeping my eyes on the path while also watching for landmarks. The forest was silent in a way that felt unnatural now. I passed a few deer, startled by my presence, and some birds, but nothing larger. Hours passed, the sun moving across the sky, my water bottle slowly emptying, my backpack growing heavier with sweat-soaked clothes. I reached the top of a ridge just as clouds began gathering, dark and heavy. The wind picked up, and I could feel the first drops of rain. I decided to set up a small tarp for shelter, just in case the storm worsened. The rain came suddenly, sheets of it, cold and sharp, soaking me through despite my jacket. I took cover under my tarp, shivering, my hands numb as I tried to arrange my gear. The forest changed in the storm, sounds muffled, visibility low, the ground slick and dangerous. I realized that the trail I had planned to take back was now treacherous. Rocks became slippery, roots hidden under leaves could cause a fall, and the streams I had crossed earlier were swelling with rainwater. My heart sank as I realized I might have underestimated the weather. I decided to wait under the tarp until the rain slowed, but hours passed, and the storm showed no sign of easing. Darkness began to fall, and I knew I could not hike safely in these conditions. I gathered my strength and decided to make a temporary camp, even if it was not ideal. I found a small, flat area under some trees, avoiding areas where water could pool or rocks could fall. I set up my tent as best as I could, the ground wet and muddy, and lit a small fire, grateful for the dry kindling I had packed. The fire cast flickering shadows, and I sat close to it, warming my hands, trying to calm my racing thoughts. That night was worse than the first. The storm continued, wind howling through the trees, rain hammering the tent. I could hear branches snapping, trees creaking under the pressure, and my mind played tricks on me, imagining shapes moving outside the tent. I stayed awake most of the night, listening, feeling the isolation press against me. Sleep came in short bursts, nightmares of slipping on the wet rocks, falling into the swollen creek, being lost forever. Morning brought no relief. The storm had passed, but the forest was a mess of fallen branches, muddy trails, and swollen streams. I checked my map and realized that my planned route was impassable. I would have to backtrack and find another way. The sun was weak through the cloud cover, and I felt the weight of exhaustion pressing down. I packed my wet gear, extinguished the fire, and started the hike back. Every step was slow and careful, my shoes sinking into mud, the ground slippery. I had to use my hands to climb over fallen trees, to steady myself on steep slopes. Around midday, I reached a point where I had to cross a fast-moving stream. The water was cold and turbulent, the rocks hidden beneath the surface slick and dangerous. I debated my options, knowing that falling could mean serious injury or worse. I found a fallen log that created a narrow bridge across part of the water. Step by step, I moved carefully, my balance precarious, my backpack throwing me off-center with every step. Halfway across, the log shifted slightly under my weight. My heart leapt into my throat. I froze, waiting for it to settle. Slowly, carefully, I continued, gripping the log and bending my knees to keep my center of gravity low. I made it across, soaked and trembling, but alive. I continued my hike, more cautious than ever. I realized that the wilderness could be beautiful and peaceful, but also unforgiving and dangerous. I moved slowly, taking breaks, drinking water, and keeping my eyes constantly on the trail. By evening, I finally reached the edge of the forest, the familiar sounds of birds and insects welcoming me back to a place closer to civilization. I emerged onto a dirt road that led back to my car, mud covering my boots, scratches on my arms from branches, but otherwise unharmed. The drive home was long and quiet. I reflected on the trip, on the fear, the isolation, and the constant awareness of danger. I realized that nature was not something to conquer, but something to respect. The forest had taught me patience, humility, and the importance of preparation. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I was exhausted, dirty, and drained, but I felt alive in a way that only comes from facing real fear and surviving it. I unpacked my gear, cleaned up, and took a long shower, feeling the warmth of water on my sore muscles. That night, as I lay in my own bed, I thought about the trip. I was grateful to have made it back safely. I felt a deep respect for the wilderness and a quiet pride in my own resilience. I had faced fear, isolation, and physical challenge, and I had survived. I understood now that camping alone was not about escaping the world, but about confronting the raw, real challenges of nature and coming through stronger. The experience stayed with me, vivid in memory. The smell of wet pine, the sound of the storm, the cold water of the creek, the weight of my backpack, and the relief of reaching safety. It was a story I would carry with me forever, a story of fear, endurance, and ultimately triumph. I had been planning this camping trip for months. I wanted something different from the usual crowded state parks and noisy campgrounds. I wanted isolation, silence, and the chance to sleep under the stars without another soul around. I decided on a section of national forest I had read about online. It was remote, miles from any road, and according to what I could find, it was rarely visited. The area had trails that faded quickly into dense woodland, thick with pine and oak, with a small river running through a valley at the center. It was perfect. I told myself that a few days alone in the forest would reset my mind. I packed carefully, triple-checking everything. A lightweight tent, sleeping bag, stove, water filter, first aid kit, extra food, a flashlight, spare batteries, fire starter, compass, map, and a small hatchet. I even brought bear spray, although I thought the chances of encountering a bear were slim. Still, I wanted every precaution in place. My backpack was heavy, but I knew it was worth it. I arrived at the forest at first light. The drive was long, mostly over dirt roads that became narrower and rougher as I went deeper into the woods. At some point, my car barely fit between overgrown trees and brush on either side. I parked near the last cleared area I could find, just where a faint path disappeared into dense vegetation. The forest ahead looked untouched. The air smelled clean, earthy, and cold. Mist hung low between the trunks, and a faint fog hovered above the ground. I could hear the river somewhere downhill, and the occasional bird or rustle in the underbrush. I set off on the trail, moving slowly. The forest was quiet, but not silent. There were layers of sound, twigs snapping under my boots, birds calling intermittently, and the occasional hum of insects. The path quickly became overgrown, forcing me to duck under branches and step carefully over roots. Every few minutes, I stopped to check my map and compass, making sure I wasn't walking in circles. Hours passed as I navigated deeper, following the faint glimmer of the river on the map. By midday, I found a clearing near the riverbank. It wasn't large, but it had enough space to pitch my tent and set up a small fire pit. The ground was slightly damp, the grass flattened by previous rainfall. I picked this spot, feeling a sense of satisfaction. I set up my tent, layered my sleeping bag inside, and stored my backpack just outside the entrance. I gathered some firewood along the riverbank, noting that some logs were wet, others dry, broken branches that could catch fire easily. I stacked them neatly near the cleared pit. By the time I finished, the sun was low, filtering gold through the canopy. I built a small fire and boiled water for dinner. The quietness of the forest made every crackle of the flames, every pop from sap in the wood, feel magnified. I ate slowly, watching the sun dip behind the trees. Once dark fell, the forest changed. Shadows deepened. Shapes that were barely visible in daylight became indistinct and threatening in the firelight. The river reflected slivers of moonlight, silver and shifting, and the sounds of the forest at night were entirely different, strange, low, and almost alive. Around midnight, I had finished reading a book by flashlight and was getting ready to sleep. The wind picked up slightly, causing the branches to sway and brush against each other. Then I heard something, a rustle, a soft snap, coming from the far side of the clearing. I froze. My eyes scanned the darkness beyond the circle of firelight. The noise stopped as soon as I stopped moving. I waited, listening. Silence. Then a few moments later, another snap, this one closer. I stood slowly, shining my flashlight toward the sound. The beam caught nothing but thick shadows and trees. My mind ran through possibilities. Deer, a raccoon, maybe a fox, but the feeling in my stomach told me something was wrong. It was too heavy, too purposeful. Then I heard it again. A heavier step, deliberate, moving parallel to the clearing. My first thought was a bear, even though I hoped it wasn't. I grabbed the bear spray, keeping my flashlight trained on the darkness, watching for any glint of eyes or shape. I stayed like that for an hour until the noises finally stopped. Couldn't sleep, not fully. Every crackle in the forest made my heart jump. I checked my gear, ensuring my knife and flashlight were within reach, my bear spray in hand, my tent zipped shut. I tried to calm myself, but the feeling didn't leave. Something wasn't right. The next morning, I decided to explore a bit. I didn't want to stay in the clearing all day. I packed some water and snacks and followed the river upstream, moving cautiously. The forest was denser here. Trees leaned in toward the river, their roots exposed, making the ground uneven and treacherous. Occasionally, I heard branches snap behind me, but when I turned, Nothing was there. I kept moving, trying to convince myself it was just the forest settling or small animals. About 2 miles upstream, I found a small abandoned cabin, hidden partially by undergrowth. It looked old, but the roof was intact. Windows were dark, and the door hung slightly open. My curiosity got the better of me. I approached slowly, careful not to step on dry twigs. Inside, dust covered every surface. A collapsed bed frame, broken furniture, and a few rusted tools were all that remained. I didn't linger long. Something about the cabin felt wrong. Not haunted, but wrong. I left quickly, feeling eyes on me the whole time, though I saw no one. Returning to camp, the sun was low again. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself it was just nerves and isolation. I built the fire again, ate dinner, and watched the night descend. Darkness fell faster here than I expected. The forest swallowed light, turning familiar shapes into looming shadows. Then I heard it, a sound unmistakably human but quiet. Footsteps. They weren't slow, they weren't heavy, but they had rhythm. I froze, listening. They moved around the perimeter of my clearing, circling. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it across the treeline. Nothing. I stayed up all night, barely sleeping. Each noise, each movement made me tense. At some point, I heard something brush against my tent, light, but deliberate. I sprayed my flashlight across the area, empty. But my gut told me someone had been there. Someone was watching, waiting. By the next morning, I knew I couldn't stay. I packed as quickly and quietly as possible, leaving minimal signs of my presence. I left food scattered in a way that might confuse someone following tracks, making it seem like I had moved downstream. I took the river as my guide, carefully navigating over slippery rocks, through dense undergrowth, always alert. As I moved, I noticed signs of someone else. A makeshift campfire that looked recently used, footprints half submerged in mud, plastic wrappers I hadn't left. Someone had been there, maybe following the same path I was planning to take. My pace increased. My heart raced with every step. I stuck to the river, hoping it would lead me to a more accessible trail or road. By midday, I reached a point where the river split, and a faint dirt path ran parallel to it. I followed it, trying to ignore the thorns scratching my arms, the constant buzzing in my ears from fear and exhaustion. I could see the first signs of human interference. Tire tracks in the mud, the faint smell of smoke from a distant fire. Relief began to wash over me. I was heading back to civilization. Hours later, I finally emerged from the forest onto a wider dirt road. The sight of a passing truck made me freeze, but when the driver waved, I waved back and ran to the road, motioning frantically. They stopped, and I climbed into the cab, drenched in sweat and mud, shaking. I gave them the name of the nearest town, my voice trembling. As we drove away, I watched the forest shrink in the rearview mirror, dense and silent again. I reported what I experienced to the authorities once I returned to town. They said such remote areas were occasionally used by illegal hunters or squatters. That explained the cabin, the footprints, the circling. It wasn't a ghost or something supernatural, it was real, terrifyingly real. The isolation made every step, every sound, every shadow amplified. I never returned to that forest. The experience stayed with me for months. The feeling of being watched, the sound of footsteps in the dark, the tense nights trying to stay calm in the silence. It was a reminder that nature, no matter how beautiful, can hide dangers that are human as well as natural. And the lesson was clear. Some places are better admired from a distance, and sometimes the most terrifying thing is just another person, lurking in the dark, unseen but very real. I had always loved camping alone. It was never about escaping people. It was about being fully aware of my own senses, stripped down to the essentials of life. The forest was honest that way. It didn't pretend or deceive. You had to pay attention or it would punish you. That was something I understood well. I chose a site deep in the mountains, miles away from any road or trail that anyone might use. The area was known for its dense trees, a mix of pine and oak, with undergrowth thick enough that walking off the beaten path was difficult. I arrived mid-afternoon, carrying a pack that weighed nearly 40 pounds. It had all the basics: tent, sleeping bag, stove, some food, water, and a first aid kit. I had been careful in planning, checking the weather reports and ensuring that I had enough supplies for 3 days. The sky had been clear in the morning, and the sun shone bright, throwing long shadows as it began to descend. The first part of setting up camp was routine. I chose a small clearing surrounded by trees. The ground was uneven, but I found a spot firm enough to pitch my tent. I cleared stones and twigs from the area and laid down a tarp under the tent to protect it from moisture. The sound of birds mixed with the occasional rustle of squirrels moving through the leaves filled the silence. It was calming, and I felt that quiet confidence that comes with being completely alone in the wilderness. Once the tent was up, I unpacked my supplies. Water was crucial, so I filled my bottles from a nearby stream and filtered it carefully. Then I gathered firewood, a combination of dead branches and smaller logs. I knew that as night approached, temperature drops could be severe, so a good fire was necessary not just for cooking, but for safety. I built a small, controlled fire in a fire ring I made from stones. The smell of burning would fill the air, earthy and grounding. As I ate dinner, a simple meal of rice and beans, I noticed the first subtle signs that things weren't entirely normal. The forest, while usually filled with gentle, predictable sounds at this hour, had become almost too quiet. The birds had gone to roost, and even the squirrels had stopped moving. Only the wind whispered through the trees. First, I thought it was just late in the day, but the silence was different. It was tense, expectant. I tried to ignore it. Night fell quickly. The temperature dropped more sharply than I had anticipated, and I crawled into my sleeping bag, listening. The fire crackled in front of my tent, sending occasional sparks into the dark. I had always prided myself on being alert in situations like this, but as darkness thickened, my instincts sharpened. Around midnight, the sound began. At first, it was subtle, a low, dragging noise coming from somewhere beyond the clearing. I froze, listening. My first thought was a deer, but the sound didn't match the gait of any deer I had ever heard. It was heavier, deliberate. Something was moving slowly through the underbrush. I unzipped the tent slightly and peered out. The firelight illuminated a small circle, but beyond that, the darkness was thick. I saw nothing, but the sound continued, dragging across dead leaves and broken twigs. My pulse quickened. I had a small hatchet within reach and my flashlight, but I tried to remain calm. Panic was dangerous. It would only make me careless. The dragging sound grew closer. I could hear twigs snapping underfoot, the faint crunch of leaves. Then it stopped. Silence again. I waited, holding my breath, counting seconds. 10, 20, 30. Nothing. I thought I might have imagined it, or maybe it was a fox or a raccoon. I decided to wait until morning to investigate. Sleep came fitfully. Every rustle of the wind through the trees made me flinch. My mind ran through every scenario I had learned to anticipate in the wild. Predators, humans, weather. But this didn't fit any pattern. It was something else. Morning brought relief, but also new anxiety. Nothing was immediately visible outside the tent. The fire had burned down to embers, and the air was cold and damp. I ate a small breakfast and decided to do a perimeter check. Carefully, I moved around the clearing, looking for signs of wildlife or human presence. That's when I noticed the footprints. They were large, irregular, and led around the edge of my clearing in a circle before disappearing into the dense trees. They weren't human, not exactly. They were wider than a human foot, with a dragging pattern that matched the noise from last night. My stomach turned. I considered leaving immediately, but I was alone, and leaving meant moving through the same dense forest where I couldn't see what might be following me. I made a plan to stay alert, keep the fire going, and continue my hike the following day. The second night was worse. The sounds returned, closer and more purposeful. This time, I could hear breathing, low and deliberate. Whatever it wasn't hiding perfectly. I stayed inside my tent, torch in hand, watching the firelight dance against the edges of the trees. Hours passed. The thing never approached the fire directly. It stayed at the edge of my light, just beyond visibility. I didn't sleep at all. I just waited, listening, every nerve on edge. By morning, I was exhausted. My face felt stiff, my eyes dry, my mind frayed. But there was a silver lining. Tracks in the mud near the stream suggested it had left during the night. I took the opportunity to refill my water, move quickly, and pack my things. The hike back to civilization was slow and tense. Every rustle of leaves or crack of a branch had me stopping, scanning, ready to react. Hours passed with no sign of movement, and I began to relax slightly. Then, in a small clearing, I saw them. Multiple tracks, converging in the same direction I had been moving. This wasn't random. The creature, or creatures, had been following me not out of curiosity, but with intent. I pushed forward, keeping calm and moving deliberately. Eventually, I reached a well-used trail. The forest seemed normal here, the chaos of the deep woods giving way to familiarity. Relief washed over me. I had survived, alert, cautious, and prepared. When I finally returned home, I reported the strange tracks to a local ranger. They were unusual, possibly a bear or even a large, deformed animal, but nothing matched the pattern perfectly. Whatever it was, it stayed hidden. I had learned that in the wilderness, fear was an instrument. It sharpened awareness, demanded respect, and rewarded those who paid attention. I never went back to that particular clearing, but I kept camping because I trusted my instincts. I trusted preparation, and I trusted that I could survive, even when nature showed its teeth. Every time I returned to a remote site, I remembered the dragging sound, the irregular footprints, the oppressive darkness that seemed almost alive. And I smiled quietly to myself, knowing I had faced something real and come out whole. The experience left a mark, not of trauma, but of respect. Real fear was tangible, measurable, and conquerable. And from that day on, I never underestimated the forest or the silence that hid dangers I could barely comprehend. I understood that survival wasn't about fighting the unknown. It was about staying aware, moving carefully, and never underestimating what could be out there, just beyond the edge of the light. I had been looking forward to this camping trip for months. It wasn't about escaping the city as most people thought. For me, it was about testing myself, challenging my limits, and feeling a sense of raw survival that you can't find in concrete jungles. I had planned everything carefully. The route, the campsite, the supplies, the timing. I had picked a remote section of forest in the northern mountains, where the trails were overgrown and cell phone reception was patchy at best. It was supposed to be a 2-night solo trip, just me, my backpack, and the wilderness. The thought of being completely alone excited me more than it scared me. The first day went smoothly. I woke up at dawn, packed my gear, and drove to the trailhead. The early morning light filtered through the trees, casting long shadows across the dirt road. I parked my car, double-checked my supplies, and started walking. My backpack was heavy, loaded with food, water, a first aid kit, and extra clothing. I carried a sturdy hiking pole in one hand. The forest was quiet, almost too quiet. Birds chirped occasionally, and the wind rustled the leaves above me, but there were no other signs of human life. I felt a strange sense of freedom. There was something thrilling about knowing that if anything happened, I would have to rely entirely on myself. The trail was rough. Roots and rocks jutted out from the ground, and I had to constantly watch my footing. After a few hours, I reached a small stream and stopped to rest. I took off my boots, waded into the cool water, and drank from it after using my portable filter. I ate some jerky and a protein bar, then pressed on. The further I went, the narrower the trail became, until it was barely more than a path through dense underbrush. By the afternoon, I realized I was further into the forest than I had anticipated. The map and compass were my only guides now. As the sun began to lower, I started searching for a suitable place to set up camp. I found a small clearing near a bend in the stream, flat enough to pitch my tent. I set up camp, secured my backpack, and gathered firewood. The forest was peaceful at first, the sound of flowing water and distant birds filling the air. But as twilight approached, the forest took on a different character. Shadows stretched long, and the sounds became sharper, more distinct. The snapping of twigs, the rustle of leaves, even the creak of branches overhead seemed louder. My instincts told me to stay alert, even though nothing was directly threatening me. I built a fire, small but strong, and heated some water for dinner. As I ate, I noticed movement at the edge of the clearing, shapes among the trees. I froze, trying to identify what it could be. A deer? Maybe, but it was darker than the fading sunlight, almost impossible to see clearly. I reminded myself that I was alone but safe. I had my fire, my tent, and my gear. Still, my heart was beating faster than usual. The thought of being alone in such deep wilderness, surrounded by things I couldn't see, gave me a mix of anxiety and adrenaline. The first night passed without incident, but I hardly slept. Every sound made me tense. Every shadow made me turn my head. At some point, I thought I heard footsteps near the edge of the clearing, but when I looked, nothing was there. My flashlight revealed only trees and brush. I reminded myself that animals were common here, and humans were rare. My mind, exhausted from the long hike, was probably exaggerating things. The next day, I decided to explore deeper into the forest. I followed a small ridge, hoping to find a better vantage point to appreciate the scenery and maybe spot wildlife. The trail became even more rugged, and I had to scramble over fallen logs and steep inclines. At one point, I slipped on a patch of wet moss, scraping my leg. I paused to assess the damage, just a shallow cut, nothing serious. I cleaned it with my filtered water and wrapped it with a bandage. But the slip reminded me that even small accidents could escalate quickly in a place like this. I resolved to be more careful, but the thrill of navigating the terrain kept me moving. Around midday, I came across a series of deep ruts in the ground, like tracks made by something very large. I stopped and examined them closely. They were fresh, and judging by their width and depth, they belonged to a large bear. My stomach tightened. I had seen signs of bears before, but not this close. I checked my surroundings carefully, trying to determine if the animal was nearby. There were no other signs, no scat, no broken branches, nothing to indicate an immediate threat. I continued on the trail, making sure to make noise by tapping my hiking pole against rocks and branches. I reminded myself that avoiding surprise encounters was key in bear country. As evening approached, I decided to head back to my camp. The shadows were long, and the light was fading faster than I liked. When I reached the clearing, something felt off. My fire pit was cold, and the area around my tent had been disturbed. Panic surged through me. I grabbed my backpack and checked my supplies. Everything was there, but something had definitely moved. I noticed paw prints near the tent, and my stomach sank. They were large, undoubtedly a bear. My fire had probably scared it off, but the fact that it had come so close unnerved me. I spent the night on high alert, keeping my fire going and sitting up for hours, listening to the forest. The following morning, I realized I needed to move. Staying in the same spot was too risky. I packed my camp quickly, keeping my bear spray accessible, and started back along the trail toward the car. The terrain was tougher than I expected. I had underestimated the distance, and my legs were sore. Around mid-afternoon, I heard a loud crack behind me. I froze, scanning the trees. A bear? Or just a falling branch? My heart pounded. I tried to move quickly but quietly, keeping my eyes and ears alert. Then, I saw it massive, dark, moving slowly but deliberately in the distance, following my general path. It was definitely a bear, and it had noticed me. Fear hit me like a wall. I knew running was dangerous, but I couldn't stand still either. I slowly backed off the path, making my way toward thicker brush, hoping to break line of sight. The bear made a low growl and I froze. My mind raced. I had read countless survival guides, and I knew that climbing a tree could be a last resort. But these bears were capable climbers. I tried to stay calm, speaking softly to myself, remembering to make myself appear non-threatening. Every step I took was careful, deliberate, and slow. The bear mirrored me, staying a distance behind, moving with a patient, predatory intelligence that sent chills down my spine. Hours seemed to pass in a blur. The forest became darker, and my legs ached with exhaustion. I knew I had to find a safe location to wait it out. I spotted a small rock outcropping near the trail and climbed up, hoping the elevation would give me some security. I kept my bear spray ready, my eyes scanning every movement. The bear lingered below for a while, then seemed to lose interest, moving off to the side. I waited until I could no longer hear it before trying to move again, inching my way carefully toward a safer part of the trail. Eventually, I reached a larger creek, a natural barrier that could provide some safety. I followed it, keeping to the banks where I could see and hear any movement. By nightfall, I found a small, enclosed area with dense trees and rocks where I could set up a temporary camp. I built a small fire and ate a quick meal, my nerves still raw from the encounter. I realized I would have to spend another night here, but I felt slightly more secure. I kept the fire alive and positioned myself where I could see the surroundings. Sleep came fitfully, filled with half-dreams of the bear returning. The next morning, I carefully made my way along the creek, aiming to reconnect with a larger, safer trail. My legs were sore, my energy low, but I forced myself onward. After hours of hiking, I finally spotted the familiar dirt road leading to my car. Relief washed over me. I moved faster, adrenaline helping me push through fatigue. When I reached my vehicle, I collapsed onto the seat, exhausted but profoundly relieved. I double-checked that nothing had followed me, then drove off slowly, constantly scanning the roadside until I hit the main highway and civilization. The experience left me shaken but also deeply reflective. I had been confident, maybe even cocky, about my wilderness skills, and this trip had reminded me how quickly things can become dangerous in nature. I had been lucky. My careful preparation, awareness, and calm thinking had allowed me to survive. I had learned firsthand the importance of respecting the wilderness, understanding animal behavior, and never underestimating the risks. The fear I had felt was real, visceral, and it changed the way I viewed solo adventures. I didn't want to rush back to the city life, but I knew that any future trips would be approached with far more caution and respect. Nature is beautiful, but it demands vigilance. That lesson stayed with me long after the bruises healed. A reminder that survival is often a mix of preparation, awareness, and a little bit of luck. I had planned this camping trip for weeks. I had mapped out a small stretch of forest far from any real town, far from cell signal, far from anyone I knew. I wanted to escape, to be alone, to immerse myself in the quiet that only deep woods could offer. The drive there had been long, along a twisting gravel road flanked by pines and maples, their tops forming jagged silhouettes against the fading orange of the afternoon sky. I parked near a barely visible clearing, enough space for a single car and a small tent. As I stepped out, the smell of wet earth and pine sap hit me. It was sharp, clean, and somehow alive, unlike the dry, stale air of the city I had left behind. I spent the first hour unpacking my gear. The tent went up without a hitch, though it felt odd to be so alone in a place so vast. I set my sleeping bag and backpack inside, arranged my small stove and fuel canister, and gathered firewood. The forest was calm, almost eerily so, except for the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant call of a bird. The silence was heavier than I expected. It wasn't peaceful in the way a park might be. It was quiet in a way that demanded attention. Every snap of a twig sounded louder than it should. Every small movement in the underbrush seemed intentional. I made the fire just as the sun began to dip behind the trees. The flames danced, casting tall, wavering shadows that stretched across the clearing. I cooked a small meal, something simple: beans, a bit of rice, and some dehydrated vegetables. The heat from the fire kept me comfortable as the temperature dropped sharply once the sun disappeared. Night came fast in this part of the forest, and with it, a darkness so complete it swallowed the trees beyond the firelight. I tried to focus on the fire, on the small circle of light it created, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest was watching me. Around midnight, the first warning came. At first, it was subtle, a crunch of leaves somewhere in the distance. I told myself it was a deer, a raccoon, or some other animal moving near my campsite. But then there was another sound, closer this time. A snap of a branch, deliberate and measured. I froze, staring into the blackness beyond the fire. My heart rate spiked. The forest didn't have that many big predators this far south. Not anything that should care about a lone human, not at least in the early hours of night. But instinct has a way of overriding reason, and every hair on my body was standing on end. I grabbed a flashlight and slowly shone it into the shadows beyond the fire. The beam cut a sharp circle through the darkness, illuminating trees and underbrush. Nothing moved. I lowered the flashlight, thinking I was imagining it, but then I heard it again. A deliberate step, soft but certain, on the dirt a little ways from the clearing. I tried to make sense of it, telling myself that if it was an animal, it would have made more noise or revealed itself by now. Silence fell again, heavier than before. The kind of silence that presses against your ears and chest. I stayed up for hours, moving the flashlight around, poking the dark corners of the forest, my fire dying down to glowing embers. Each time I heard a movement, my heart jumped. I reminded myself to breathe, to stay calm, to remember that the woods were full of sounds, many harmless. But the unease didn't leave. Every snap, every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves felt like it was aimed at me, deliberate and purposeful. Couldn't ignore it. By 3 a.m., I was exhausted but couldn't sleep. I was bundled in my sleeping bag, knees pulled to my chest, staring at the dark tree-line, watching for any sign of movement. I decided to check the perimeter of my small campsite just to reassure myself. I stepped lightly on the damp earth, careful not to crack the sticks underfoot. The forest was still, but as I rounded the tent, I noticed something that stopped me cold. A footprint, fresh and large, pressed into the soft soil. It was not an animal track. The size and shape were human. I sank to the ground to examine it closer. The mud around it was soft, and the print had a clear heel and toe like a boot or hiking shoe. My stomach sank. Whoever it was, they had been close enough to see my fire, perhaps my tent, and they had moved carefully enough not to alert me until now. I traced the edges of the print with my fingers, noting how deep it was pressed into the ground. Heavy, intentional, someone strong. I moved back to my tent, keeping my flashlight trained on the ground as I retraced my steps. The forest around me seemed alive in a way it hadn't before. Shadows shifted unnaturally, leaves trembled without wind, and every small sound seemed magnified. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was another camper, maybe someone hiking late, but there were no other vehicles, no sign of a trail leading here. My mind raced with worst-case scenarios. I decided to pack up my essentials quietly, preparing to move deeper into the forest, away from whoever or whatever was near my campsite. The pack felt heavier than usual, but I moved carefully, silently, keeping the fire embers low. As I walked, I noticed more signs. A broken branch on a low tree, footprints that weren't there before, and an occasional shadow moving at the edge of my light. Whoever it was, they were tracking me, staying just out of direct view. The realization sent a wave of adrenaline through me. I was alone, far from help, in an environment designed to conceal danger. I spent the next hour moving cautiously through the forest, sticking to uneven terrain and underbrush that made it difficult to follow me. Every sound made me flinch. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see someone emerge from the shadows. The night dragged on endlessly. By the time the first hint of dawn came, I had covered almost 2 miles of rugged forest, my pack scraping against branches, my legs sore from climbing over fallen logs and uneven ground. Dawn didn't bring comfort. It brought visibility, and with it, a way to see how close I had come to serious danger. I found disturbed ground where my pursuer had followed me, noting broken branches and footprints. I realized they had likely spent the night nearby, keeping me under watch. My mind replayed everything. The silent steps, the footprints near my fire, the subtle sounds meant to unsettle me. It had been methodical, calculated, and I hadn't been safe for a single moment. I moved toward a service road I had marked on my map, hoping to meet a car or a ranger. My pace quickened as the daylight strengthened, revealing the forest fully. Thick underbrush, tall trees, and occasional rocky outcrops. After an exhausting hour, I finally emerged onto the gravel road. Relief washed over me, but my body was shaking from tension, fatigue, and fear. I kept moving, eventually spotting a small ranger station a mile down the road. I approached it, my hands dirty, my clothes torn in places from branches, my eyes wide and alert. The ranger took me seriously when I explained what had happened. He radioed in a search for anyone reported in the area, noting the footprints and disturbed forest. By mid-afternoon, another ranger vehicle came, following my description of where I had seen the signs. They didn't find anyone, but they reassured me that what I had experienced was real. Someone had been watching my campsite. It wasn't supernatural, it wasn't a ghost or a fairy tale. It was a human, someone intent on intimidation, maybe worse. After leaving the forest, I drove back with my adrenaline slowly subsiding, reflecting on every detail. The isolation that had initially drawn me in now felt like a trap. The fear I had felt had been raw, unfiltered, and entirely human. I knew I had been lucky. If I had stayed at my original campsite, I might have been discovered when I was unprepared. But by paying attention to signs, moving carefully, and relying on instinct, I had survived. I still think about that night sometimes, the way the forest could hold a presence unseen, the way the quiet had been anything but empty. I don't camp there anymore. I tell people the forest is dangerous, not because of ghosts or myths, but because of humans and the reality that someone can hide quietly in the darkness, watching, calculating, waiting. And when you're alone in the wilderness, that is the scariest thing of all. I had always liked camping alone. There was something about being away from the city, away from people, away from schedules that gave me a strange sense of freedom. I had planned this trip for weeks. I had researched the trail, the weather, and the terrain. I had mapped out where I would camp each night, checked my gear multiple times, and made sure I had extra food and water. I thought I was ready for anything. The first day of hiking went smoothly. The sun was high, the air crisp, and the forest smelled like pine and earth after rain. I carried my backpack, which felt heavier than usual but manageable. The trail was narrow and winding, sometimes disappearing under fallen leaves and loose rocks, but I kept my pace steady. Occasionally, I would stop to take photos or just breathe, letting the quiet of the forest sink into me. The deeper I went, the fewer people I saw, until eventually, there was no one at all. It was just me and the endless stretch of trees and underbrush. By late afternoon, I reached a small clearing that looked perfect for camping. A shallow stream ran nearby, and there was enough flat ground for my tent. I set up camp quickly, hammering the stakes into the soft earth and arranging my sleeping bag and gear inside the tent. I felt a small thrill of accomplishment. Being alone, completely isolated, had always given me a strange mix of comfort and nervous energy. I started a fire to cook dinner. The flames danced in the quiet of the forest, sending sparks up into the sky. I cooked my food, ate slowly, and cleaned up meticulously. After a while, the sun started to sink behind the trees, and the forest became darker than I expected. Shadows stretched long and twisted around the trees, making everything look unfamiliar. I double-checked my gear, zipped up my tent, and climbed inside. That night, the forest was alive in a way I had never noticed before. Leaves rustled above me, branches creaked, and somewhere in the distance, an animal cried out. I could hear small feet moving in the underbrush. I reminded myself that it was normal. Deer, raccoons, maybe a fox, but the sounds were unnervingly close. I tried to sleep, but every little noise made me tense. Eventually, exhaustion overcame my fear, and I drifted off, only to wake several times during the night, heart pounding. The next day, I packed up early. I wanted to get farther down the trail before it got dark again. The trail became steeper, and my legs ached from the climb. The forest changed too. The trees were older, taller, and the underbrush thicker. I had to push branches aside and step over fallen logs. Every step felt like effort, and the thought of turning back crossed my mind. But I kept going, reminding myself that I had planned this, that I knew the way, that I was careful. Around midday, I reached a point where the trail forked. One path led deeper into the forest, the other seemed to skirt along the side of a hill. I checked my map, but my location was vague. I decided to take the path along the hill, thinking it would eventually reconnect with the main trail. First, it was fine. The path was narrow but manageable. But as I walked, I realized it was becoming harder to follow. The trail was overgrown, and the ground was slick with mud from an earlier rain. I slipped a few times, scraping my hands and knees. The forest seemed darker here, even in the middle of the day. I tried to stay calm. I reminded myself that I had a compass and a map. I stopped several times to reorient myself, but the path ahead looked the same: dense trees, uneven ground, and no signs of the main trail. My heart started to beat faster. I was lost. I tried to retrace my steps, but the forest was disorienting. Every tree looked the same, every rock familiar in a way that made it impossible to tell which way I had come. Hours passed, and the sun began to dip lower in the sky. I had no idea where I was. My phone had no signal. My GPS device was dead despite my careful planning, and the forest seemed to close in around me. I decided to stop and make camp. Even though it was early, I found a small flat area near some rocks, cleared away leaves and branches, and set up my tent. I tried to start a fire, but the wood was damp. After struggling for half an hour, I managed a small flame, enough to warm some water and eat a meager dinner. As night fell, the forest became a place of shadows. Every sound seemed magnified: the rustle of leaves, the snap of twigs, the distant cry of an unknown animal. I kept my flashlight close, checking it frequently, listening to the wind move through the trees. Sleep was impossible. I lay in my sleeping bag, trying to calm my racing thoughts. I knew I had to stay alert. Being lost in the forest at night was dangerous. I had heard stories of people getting hurt or trapped, even in areas that were supposed to be safe. Around midnight, I heard something unusual. It wasn't an animal. It was a low, steady sound, like someone walking carefully but deliberately nearby. My stomach dropped. I froze, straining my ears. The sound stopped for a moment, then resumed, closer this time. My mind raced. Could it be another camper? A hunter? Someone else lost? I had no way of knowing. I gripped my flashlight and my knife, feeling a surge of fear I had never experienced before. I stayed still for hours, listening. The footsteps came closer, circled my tent, and then moved away. I couldn't see anything in the darkness, but I could hear the faint sound of breathing or movement. I stayed awake until dawn, too afraid to sleep, too afraid to move. When the first light of morning filtered through the trees, I felt a small relief. The forest was still, except for the usual sounds of birds and wind. Whatever had been out there had left. I didn't want to stay another night. I packed up quickly, moving as fast as I could without rushing and risking injury. The forest seemed less threatening in daylight, but the fear lingered. I tried to find the main trail, checking my map and compass carefully. Every turn seemed wrong, every familiar landmark misleading. Hours passed, and I realized I had gone in a circle. I was exhausted, hungry, and desperate. By late afternoon, I spotted a narrow dirt road cutting through the trees. Relief flooded me. I followed it, hoping it would lead to civilization. The road twisted and turned, and my legs ached from the constant walking, but eventually, I saw a small parking area with cars and a trailhead sign. I ran toward it, feeling tears of relief on my face. I had made it out. I reported my location to the park rangers, explaining that I had gotten lost. They were calm but firm, reminding me how easy it was to get disoriented in that forest and how dangerous it could have been. They gave me water, food, and first aid for my scrapes and bruises. I realized then how lucky I had been. A few hours more, and the night could have been much worse. The experience stayed with me long after I returned home. I learned to respect the forest in a way I never had before. I realized that no amount of planning could make me completely safe. The wilderness is unpredictable, and being alone means that mistakes have consequences. I never camped in that forest again, and I never went alone. But I did not stop camping. I continued to explore more carefully, more cautiously, and with a renewed awareness of the risks involved. I made sure I always had someone with me, or at least a way to communicate. And every time I prepared for a trip, I remembered that night. The fear, the uncertainty, the relief, and I carried it with me, quietly, like a lesson written into my memory. In the end, I survived because I stayed calm when I could, because I kept moving, because I trusted my instincts even when I was lost. I survived because I refused to give up, even when the forest seemed to close in around me, silent and unyielding. And when I finally reached safety, I felt a mix of exhaustion, relief, and clarity that I had never experienced before. The forest had tested me, and I had come through it, changed but stronger, aware that the real dangers of the wild are not monsters or myths. They are the unseen challenges, the hidden risks, and the small decisions that make the difference between life and death.